Good evening all and welcome. Tonight's video has been graciously sponsored by Skillshare. This amazing platform offers a huge variety of online classes on literally anything you can think of, taught by the experts themselves. And with many of us now being stuck at home a hell of a lot more, it might be time to brush up on your existing skills or learn something entirely new. Be productive, make the most of your time, like me. I've been learning Tai Chi from the Aquarius Academy, and I think I'm really starting to get somewhere now. If anyone else is interested, I highly recommend them. There are so many classes you can do, so go nuts and learn everything you possibly can. The first 1,000 people who click the link in my description will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium, so hurry up because this won't last longer than a few days. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I don't really believe in the paranormal. I think there was probably an explanation, but I was too young to know what it was. I'm going to tell the story as I remember it. My room wasn't very large, a typical square room, mostly taken up by a dresser, bookshelf/TV stand combo, and my twin-sized bed. The bed bisected the room, separating the entrance door from the sliding closet door. As I was young, I'd like to have the fan on. I had one of those long extendo chains for the light, so I could turn off my light and still enjoy the fan at nights. I was in my room messing around not long before bed. I've always been an active person, and in my childhood, I was never anywhere in the house without a trusty toy sword or toy sword stand-in at close hand, and tonight was no exception. I don't remember why I swung, because again, small room, but I swung my sword and it struck the long chain for the light. Anywho, whoever has accidentally whacked their chain knows what happened next. The chain goes flying into the air, wraps itself endlessly around the light fixture, and turns off the light. In an instant, I was plunged into darkness. Annoyed, I clambered onto my bed and began to tentatively reach up. I didn't want to stick my hand in the fan blade, but I needed to reach really close in order to begin untangling the chain. I froze when I heard a shuffling sound and then a groan. It sounded close by in my room with me. It sounded like the closet door was sliding open on its old track. I kept trying to reach up, but now the hair on my arm was standing on end. The groan of the door finally stopped, but what replaced it was a heavy, throaty breathing. I imagined it? Of course. I had to have, because what little boy doesn't have an overactive imagination? But all the same, I was terrified. I gave up trying to untangle the light chain and instead reached for the top of it, where the chain fed directly into the light fixture. The breathing was closer now, and my brain was happy to provide the loudest sounds and the horrifying images of everything they belonged to creeping towards my bed. I found the chain, and I pulled. I know I pulled. I heard the click, but perhaps I just wanted to, because the light did not flood the room and banish away the darkness of my fears. I pulled again and again. Surely the chain was just too tightly wound to activate the light. Of course it was. I couldn't wait to find out. I dove off my bed and lunged for the door to my bedroom, flung it open and allowed the light from the hallway to spill into the room. I whirled around, toy sword still in hand, but there was nothing there. The gloom of my bedroom stared back at me. Bed, dresser, bookcase with my TV and Xbox perched atop, and no monsters. I re-entered my room and climbed onto the bed once more, reached up, and with the aid of the hall light pulled firmly on the base of the light string. With a loud click, the light turned on, and my bedroom returned to normal. I unwound the light chain from the light fixture and climbed off the bed. sunspots dancing in my eyes from looking at the light and feeling a little woozy from the past minute. But it was okay. It was all in my imagination. There was no monster. The light wasn't turning on because I was pulling it wrong. I could explain everything very easily. Except for why my closet door was open. I used to work for the DNC in Yosemite National Park, and I lived with my boyfriend at the time in one of the employee tent cabins by the stables. They don't like to put non-stable employees over there because the trees aren't maintained like they are in Huff or Boys Town, and it's just a much smaller area. But we complained so much about the constant partying in Huff that they stuck us over there in Tent 13B. 13B was a rebuild of Tent 13, which had been crushed by a tree the year before. My boss at the lodge told me this story about him being one of the first responders out there when it happened. During the evening, a ton of snow fell, piling up several feet in just an hour or two. Then during the night, the temperature raised, and all the snow began to melt. Which doesn't sound like a problem, except that all the snow weighing down on the branches of these huge trees starts cascading down and bringing other, larger branches with it. Sometimes the weight will bring the entire tree down, since root systems are shallow. The kid who lived in Tent 13 was sleeping during all of this, and one of these weighted trees fell, crushing part of the employee kitchen, bathroom, and finally across the middle of his body as he was laying in bed. My boss told me that when they came to the scene, his body was purple and his eyes had popped out of their sockets. It cut him in half, effectively. That scene really haunted me, especially knowing we lived in the same spot. The kid was only 27 at the time, which was the age I am now. He hated working for the DNC, like me, and he was slated to leave the park for the high country the very next day. On Christmas Eve, we were all packed up to leave the park the next day for good, since we had both quit the job. That evening, a ton of snow dumped into the valley. Several feet of snow accumulated in just an hour or two. Then at night, it warmed up, and branches started falling. My boyfriend had drank himself into a coma, and even slapping him in the face had no effect. Tent cabins are made of canvas, and you can't see out, so the sound of huge branches breaking off all around is extra terrifying. It sounded like actual bombs going off, hitting our roof and other cabins. If you've never heard a tree breaking and falling, don't worry, it's unmistakable. I didn't feel like going into the employee kitchen would be safer, since it had been crushed last year too. So I just laid in bed listening all night. At one point right behind the tent, I heard a tree break at the base. I braced myself for the end, and I could hear it was about to fall. And then with this huge thud, it fell right behind our tent and ended up destroying one of the stable fences. Obviously we were okay, but I have never been more scared in my life. It was a night of absolute horror, and knowing there was nothing more I could do about it. Yosemite is a powerful, wonderful place, but I'm glad that I don't live there anymore. I remembered this because as an avid World of Warcraft player, the current game isn't fun for me anymore, and I was thinking back on my past as a gamer. I've never told anyone about this because I haven't thought of it in many years, and my family is very anti-gaming, so I just kept it to myself. This happened back when I was in junior high. At the time, The first Call of Duty game was all I played on PC, and spent hundreds of hours online. I don't remember if anyone remembers a gaming chat platform called Xfire. It was like Steam, just without selling games. You could add people and see what games they were playing and join them. It wasn't uncommon for people to add each other after a good match. This was many years ago, and I don't remember many details, but I'll do my best. So, I added this person whose Xfire's name I don't remember. While playing Call of Duty together, we spoke many times, and he, or at least I assume it was a he, would ask me questions, like where I lived and what was my name. At the time I was a lonely kid, coming to terms with the fact that I was gay, and just assumed this guy was my age, and I was happy to make a friend. His chats quickly turned creepy. I remember he would get angry at me when I wasn't in the same multiplayer match as him, or when I wasn't responding fast enough. He would call me by my first name, which I had told him earlier on our chats. I don't remember how we started doing this, but he began to roleplay and chat with me. He would type that he was rubbing my leg or kissing my forehead. As a lonely gay kid, I thought I had met someone my age who was interested in me. Let me just say that I was a very stupid kid who was never taught the dangers of online chats. I'm embarrassed even today that I went along with this for as long as I did, which was maybe a few months at most. The climax of all of this was when he told me he wanted to tell me a secret. I said sure, and he told me about a young boy he knew. I don't remember exactly what he said about him, but I remember he said that he lived in Vegas, and he hated this kid for being a brat. I remember him saying that this kid never paid attention, and how this kid was smoking weed and was a complete loser. I remember this next part most. He then sent me a photo of what I assume was the Vegas skyline on a sunny day, with this kid photoshopped 3 times across the skyline. I remember the kid was Caucasian, with a light blue shirt, brown hair, and a black backpack. He looked around the same age as me. I remember being creeped out by this, and when I logged off, I deleted him from my friends list. The next day, I had a request from him, and being a stupid kid, I re-added him, because I was so desperate for any connection. I immediately regretted it when he messaged me that we were over, and he used my name again. Finally, my kid self had enough, and I deleted him for good and blocked him. The picture he sent stayed on my computer until I got a newer one. I do remember clicking on it a few times after this and just feeling creeped out. My family was very anti-gaming, so I knew if I told my mum that she would never let me go online again. So I kept it to myself all these years, and didn't think of it until recently. I just wanted to get this off my chest and share it with someone. Looking back, I can't believe how naive I was and desperate, that I ignored so many red flags just because I wanted a connection. That damn sure wasn't a kid that I was talking to, and I feel sick thinking of who the hell that really was. A long time ago, my job had an office near the Canadian border in Washington State. I often had to travel over there to help out and help train staff. Being a guy in my late 20s, single, and liked to get away for a few days, I was always up to making extra cash by volunteering to go wherever they needed me. I usually would fly up there, but some occasions when I needed to bring equipment or materials, I would drive. This one particular time was about 17 years ago. We had brought a bunch of equipment, wholesale, and needed to deliver this and some other odds and ends up to our office in Washington State. Of course, everyone knew I would volunteer to drive. I was told to drive a box truck up there and leave it and fly back. Prior to this, I would drive a company car or SUV. But no worries, the box truck wasn't that big, and probably the same size as one of those U-Haul rental trucks. I always preferred to start my driving journey towards the end of the day, mostly because I am one of those people who likes night driving. For the majority of my journey, it was uneventful. I only stopped at a gas station and the occasional rest stop to take care of nature's call. At some point, near the California-Oregon border, is when things started to get bad. It was approximately 1 a.m. I had stopped at a rest area, probably the last one on the California side. On the far distance, I do remember seeing some truckers parked, but basically the rest of the parking lot was empty. Now at this point, I wasn't thinking anything creepy or out of the normal. I just get out of my truck and go into the restroom to take care of business. I wash up a bit and take my sweet time stretching my legs and walk over to my truck. I notice a vehicle parked next to mine. It was literally like this whole parking lot, and this person pulls up next to me? Oh well, I jump in my truck and continue on my journey. About 10 to 20 miles down the freeway, my truck starts acting funny. Some of the interior lights begin flickering. I don't really think anything of it, and a little while later all of the lights in the vehicles go out. Interior lights, running lights, headlight. It's 2 a.m. and I'm in some wooded area of Oregon. I can't even find a flashlight in the truck cabin. I get so angry, not sure if being scared to drive 60 miles an hour in the middle of what seemed like a scene out of Tales from the Dark Side. But I pound my fist on the dashboard and scream at the truck. Almost instantly, everything came back on. I felt like Fonzie. At the next upcoming rest stop, I decide to pull over again, and perhaps from adrenaline, I had to pee like never before. I jump out of the truck and went to the restroom, although this time I didn't take that long inside, and walked out. I remember I was contemplating staying here until dawn, or just trooper on. As I walk up to my truck, I see an older guy, kind of heavy set with grey hair. He's standing next to my truck. I didn't see his vehicle near mine, but just assumed he was stretching his legs. As I walk up, he starts a conversation about the weather or something. A very light snow was falling, but not the kind of stuff that stays on the ground. I wasn't really paying much attention to him, because my first impression was that he was just a lonely old guy who wanted to chit-chat. Then he said something that made my hair stick up. He's looking at my truck and says, "Are you having mechanical problems?" I stopped in my tracks and felt blood rush to my head and just said, "Nope, just driving and trying to stay out of the cold." He then tells me that he doesn't live too far from here, and that I would be welcome to join him for a hot coffee if I needed to sleep on his sofa. That kind of gave me the creeps. But, me thinking to myself, if I needed I could take this guy out. I thought I'm younger and stronger and not afraid to defend myself. So I basically end the conversation with, "Well, I better get back on the road before the snow really starts to fall." As I'm driving away, I see that he is walking behind the restroom. So I think to myself, what the heck was that all about? My mind is racing. I'm retracing my last few stops. And how did this guy know I was having electrical problems with my truck? I suddenly think back to the stop in California and the car that was parked next to my truck. Could he have done something to my wiring while I was taking my sweet time? A few more miles down the road, no new issues with my electrical, but I decide that at the next gas station I will stop. I pull up to a gas station, and in Oregon, they don't let you pump your own gas, so I wait for the attendant, and then decide to go in and get a drink. I paid, and as I'm waiting for my fueling, I walk around my truck and look at signs of tampering, and up near the front fender of the truck, I see some smears, but I'm not really sure if it's from the road, snow, or what. I tell myself, okay, you're just freaking out. I jump back into my truck, and as I pull out the gas station, I have to make a turnaround to get back to the side where the ramp is on. And as I'm turning, and just about to exit the lot, I see a car parked in the corner, and someone sitting inside. I think to myself, am I just freaking out? Seeing shadows in every corner? It's just a few hours before dawn. Maybe in the morning I will laugh at this. But am I being followed and set up? Did I interrupt that old guy when he came out the restroom so fast? Was he following me and waiting for the right time and place? For whatever he had in mind? Perhaps wanting to get what was in the back of my truck. As I continue driving on, the snow starts to get a little bit more concerning. I didn't grow up in areas that snow, but I have had a little bit of experience driving in snow, but not enough to know when things get more hazardous. I look out my rear view side window and see a pair of headlights trailing behind me, which is odd because most drivers pass me up. This person is following me. I'm already going well under the speed limit, but I slow down a bit more. He is still not passing me. At some point, I'm getting closer to a larger city. It's still dark and the snow is still lightly falling. I decide to pull over again, and maybe the car will pass. I quickly exit the freeway, and in front of me is another gas station with a patrol car parked there. I immediately pull up next to the cops and get out. There is a lady officer there and I start making conversation with her about the snow and expected conditions. I'm thinking about telling her about the car behind me, but all of a sudden, I felt silly about it. What was I going to say? I think I'm being followed by an old man? She is kind of nice, and we're talking for a bit, and she asked me where I'm going and where I came from. She does suggest that I stop for the night, and starts to tell me about the dangers of driving sleepy. I take a look around the area and said yes, I will stop for the night. She tells me that if I go down the road a couple of blocks near the 7-Eleven, there's a motel. I look around and don't see the car anymore, and I decide that I will stop for the night and go to sleep. As I pull up to the motel, I decided to park the truck away from the room I got, and park the truck behind the motel so as not to be seen from the road. I go into my motel room as quickly as I could, lock the door, and honestly didn't get much rest. I watched TV and nodded off here and there, but would awake at every noise. My mind kept racing back to recalling the events from before the California border, to my conversation with the police. Maybe he saw me talking to the cops and decided to take off. Maybe he was waiting for me to pull over at another rest stop and complete his plan, whatever it was. Why would a stranger invite another stranger to his house in the middle of the dead of night at a rest stop? Why did he ask me if I was having problems with my truck? Finally, it's about 7 a.m., and I decided that enough was enough. I get up, check out, have a big breakfast and continue to my office without anything weird happening. But I always wondered about that night, and why I was being followed. I have been roofied 3 times, once in high school and twice when I was in college. I am no stranger to the effects of it, and it's a brutal experience as a whole. My worst was the 3rd time it happened, and hopefully the last. At the time, I was about 22 years old and finishing up college. I was using Tinder and had met a few folks. We chatted, had gone on some dates, but nothing very serious ever came of it. This one week, I had 2 dates planned. The first one on the Friday with an EMT for sushi and drinks, and the other one to the state fair on Sunday. Come Friday, I ironically had left a note for my roommate at the time with the EMT Tinder guy's name, his Facebook info and general info because of my hyper-paranoia. Hooray, anxiety. He picked me up and we went to sushi. First and foremost, he had to be one of the rudest people I have ever encountered. I'm talking yelling at waitstaff, complaining about everything, and generally being a dickhole. I was completely over any interest in this guy almost immediately, but I didn't want to be rude and ruin the date. So I finished my beverage, excused myself to the bathroom, and mass texted some friends about meeting up downtown so they could come and save me from him. A pair of friends were already planning on going out, so agreed to meet me. In the meantime, this guy and I go to a local bar and grab a beer. I buy us 2 bottles, trying to be smart, having been roofied before, and don't let it leave my sight. We drink them, and he, of course, continues to be the king of douche. Eventually he asks if we want to go somewhere else, since it was encroaching the time my friend said they would be going downtown to meet me. I suggested the spot where the save was going to go down. We walk there, burning off the 2.5 rolls of sushi I ate, 1 margarita at dinner, and 1 beer from the last place. Now keep in mind that I am not a lightweight. I'm 5'8", 135 pounds, and I can handle my drink, especially when spread out over the course of about 3 or so hours. We arrive at the bar, grab another drink, and I order a vodka and soda, while he has a beer. We go and sit at the table, positioned so that I can see the front door, and sort of chat, as I'm really not trying to say anything rude to him for the way he treated the people at the restaurant and more. Finally, my friends walk in, and I jump up and call their names. Thank goodness they're here. They walk over, say hi, and I half introduce them to the Tinder turd, and step away from the table to give them a hug and ask them to come with me to the bathroom. I turn back towards the table where the guy is sitting, also where I left my drink for about 2 minutes, and my friends and I head to the bathroom to plot the escape strategy. The plan was for me to go with them to the bar, get a drink, and we would get lost in the crowd. They'd get a beer, and we would head out. It worked just like that too. I finished my drink, walked out the bathroom with them to get to the bar, and they chugged a beer, and we went to walk out of the sight of this dude. At this point, it was like my world started spinning. I feel really loopy, and know something isn't right, but I push myself to get out the bar thinking maybe it's just anxiety of me ditching this dude. As we walk out the bar, I start blacking out, and vaguely remember my arms around my friends as we walk down the side street towards another bar. It seems that the guy saw us leaving, and he comes running out after us. He proceeds to ask my friends if I'm okay, and where I'm going. Can he come with? Are they sure that I'm okay, and that maybe he should take me home? They tell him to get lost, and that we're going to see a friend of ours down the block, and he leaves. The next thing I remember is waking up the next day. Vomit everywhere, no clothes, and bruises all over my body, and a wicked headache. Apparently the rest of my night went like this. I kept telling my friends, "Guys, I think something was put in my drink," but they thought I was saying, "I think I'm drunk," and didn't know how much I drank before I'd met them. At one bar during the night with them, I collapsed in the middle of the dance floor, and security had to carry me out. My friends opted not to call an ambulance, and sat me at a table just outside the bar. They called the last person I messaged, which was the second Tinder date I was supposed to have later in the week. Side note, I hadn't met them yet. and said that I was really messed up and asked if he could come and get me to take me home. He did. Apparently, in the car home, I was quiet and just kept saying that I had been slipped something and kept asking who he was. When we arrived at my house, I opened the door and began to projectile vomit all over the parking lot. Being that I could hardly stand, I was collapsing onto the pavement, slamming into cars. To the would-be Tinder date that just brought me home, picked me up and carried me into my house. He got me into my room and I crawled into the bathroom, making a lot more noise and more. My roommate came out of her room and was like, "Who the hell are you? What did you do to her?" And is ripping into this dude who genuinely did a really good thing by helping me when he didn't even know me. He explains to her what he knew, what I kept telling him, and that he was just helping me get home safe. At that point there was a loud thud in the bathroom. Apparently I had stripped down into my undies, thrown up all over, and attempted to throw up again, slipped on my bath mat and slammed my head onto the side porcelain bathtub, leading to a very bad concussion. My roommate is freaking out and tried to tie up my vomit-soaked hair while I'm trying to crawl out the bathroom and cry. The Tinder date who helped me leaves. I wake up in shock, covered in bruises and vomit with a massive concussion. What sucks the most is that after my friends convinced me to go to the ER to get myself looked at, the doctor gave me a massive lecture on mixing alcohol with illegal substances. There was a plethora of anti-anxiety medication and sedatives in my system with some alcohol, of which I had been prescribed some of the anxiety meds in the past, but knew better than to drink and take them because they can seriously mess you up, and I'd not taken them in about a month because I never got a new prescription. I tried to explain this to the doctor, but she rolled her eyes and alluded to the fact that I seemed like someone who enjoyed a good time and should try to be safer with my decisions next time. To top it all off, I had posted a Snapchat story of my friends with me in the hospital, with a shout out to their support in being there for me for hours, and the creepy ass guy messaged me, "What are you doing in the hospital? Did something happen to you last night? I hope you didn't think I did anything to you." Okay, yeah buddy, that doesn't scream guilt at all. I finally feel comfortable sharing this story, since I have now moved out of the house in question. A little bit of context is necessary. My stepmom and I at the time didn't get along. My dad also divorced her and had a different woman move in with us at the time that we lived there. I got along great with her, and this plays a part in the story. So, it was the summer before 8th grade, and the three of us, Dad, first stepmom and I, had moved into this 3-bedroom house that was pretty nice. My best friend and I were really excited, because my room was bigger and we had more things to do. The house was set up to where you could walk in the door and a closet was in front of you for coats and boots. To your right was the living room, and just beyond that was the dining room and kitchen. After you would walk into the living room and would be going into the dining room, and there was a hallway on your left with the bathroom on the right and my parents' room on the left. The hallway then made a right and turns into the office that was on the left, with my bedroom at the end of the hall. I know it's a bit confusing, but do understand it is important to understand the story. The corner of the hallway, right where my parents' door is very dark. Abnormally dark and eerie, in fact. But I would have to walk past it if I wanted to get to my room, or go to the kitchen. Within the first week of living there, I would hear scratching in the walls between my room and the office, and any time I was in the living room, I would hear a thud from something falling. Having 2 cats, this didn't nerve me too much, since they moved to get onto things and play. I would often ignore any sounds, and move on. Well, one night, I came home from a school dance with a star balloon and gave it to my stepmom for no reason. She had told me to just put it in her room, and I did. I put it in her closet. Both parents had separate closets, and the both of us forgot about it. Weeks later, she gets home from work before I get home from school. When I arrive, she confronts me about if I left the balloon in the hallway. Me being confused and having no memory about any balloon, walk into the hallway, and there is the silver balloon, fully inflated and dead center in the hallway. I rack my memory and tell her that it was from the school dance, and that it probably floated out of the room from a draft. We both knew this was very unlikely, since it would have to have gone through 2 closed doors and our AC, which was too crappy to push a balloon like that around. We both agree that's what it was, and forget about it. Cut to a few months later, and my stepmom comes up to me and explains what had just happened. She was in her room and doing her makeup. Out of the corner of her eye, where her closet was, she thought she saw me. She told me she wasn't in the mood for me messing around, but when she turned to where I was, no one was there. She then just laughs and said that it was weird. Things remained calm until after she moved out and my new stepmom moved in. Things started back up and the noises return. Again, I thought nothing of it because now we have 2 dogs plus 2 cats in the house, which is double the odd noises. My mum and I are talking about ghosts and whatnot, and she was telling me about how she can see them. After telling me about stories of previous haunted houses, she drops the bomb about a little girl in her closet, how she will sometimes move from my parents' room to the office, and sometimes would just be outside the hallway. My mum had advised me to never seek out a spirit, because they just want to be validated that they are real, that if you do, they won't leave you alone. My mum told me the girl was afraid of women, but loved my father, and that the girl would just stare at me from my mum's corner. I, being a horror movie nerd, but skeptic, decided to heed her warning and not do anything and just ignore anything strange. A few months into my mum moving in, she comes into my room late at night. She's shaking and says that there's something wrong with my dad and that she thinks only I can help. I walk in and my dad is just staring at the closet while breathing heavily and crying. My dad is very tall and a rough man who never cries or shows his fear, so seeing this was instantly alarming. I rush to his side, start calling his name and he doesn't respond, and just stares at the closet. I try asking my mum what happened, and she just said that he was trying to sleep, but woke up and started doing this. We started to try and get him up to get out of the room. Once he sat on the couch in the living room, he started coming to, asking why he was there and what happened. He insisted he go back to bed despite our protesting. The cycle of him going to bed, then starting to gasp and crying and coming into the living room, continued until we brought him to the porch outside, where he said he felt clearly that it was like someone was hugging him, someone child-size. He said he felt the little girl's sadness and that she was calling to him. He again went back into the room and started the cycle, but when he came to in the living room, he started getting violent, demanding to go into the room and that she needed him, that she was crying for him. My mother blocked the door into the hallway with a Bible and cross in hand and said that he wouldn't pass. My father then said that he knew how to get into the room and that he would sooner or later. This terrified us because my father wasn't like this and it was very much out of his personality. Any time my mother would come near him with the Bible and a cross, he would tell her to get away, that he didn't want her near him, that he needed to go into the room because that was his room. Eventually he made a deal with us, that if he could just talk to the girl, that he would do what we wanted. That's all he needed, to talk to the girl. We begrudgingly let him, and we told him to stay in the living room. After 5 minutes he came back out, totally fine. We asked what happened, and they talked about it. He told us then what had happened before. He said that he was the little girl's mother when he was in the living room, but was the girl's father when in the bedroom. He said that the mother was just angry and hateful. This just scared my mum and I. We just wanted this all to be over because it was 3 a.m. at this point and we were exhausted. When my parents went into their room, nothing else happened. I finally fell asleep after much tossing and turning, and in the morning, my father didn't have much memory of anything, mainly just being on the couch and on the porch. I used to have many videos about this, but they got erased. My parents don't really speak about it now. One more big thing that happened after that night, but it was directed towards me. So for context, my father and I used to make it a tradition to go down to a resale shop at our last house and buy these porcelain dolls. They were very beautiful, and we'd never had any problems with them before. Neither of my stepmums were fans of the dolls because they thought they were creepy. So because I didn't have any space in the living room, I had to place them in my closet. They all stood up and were very stable, having a stand wired to their backs. So these dolls weren't moving and had stayed in that position for months. So I was in my room settling down for the night. A few minutes after I had turned off my lights and was relaxing, I heard a loud thud from my closet. My mind is racing because I didn't know what could possibly make the noise. My brain tried to reason that perhaps one of the cats was in the closet and that they wanted out, or that maybe something just broke. I then worked up the nerve to get out of bed or to find out what it was. I could hear my heart in my eyes racing and booming. It felt like 10 minutes just standing outside my closet, trying to build up my nerve to open the door. Finally, I turned the knob and opened it, my eyes scanning the darkness. I decided to walk in to find the drawstring when I came face to face with my doll, strung up by her hair on a hanger. My scream was caught in my throat as my heart stopped. How the hell did she get like that? My dolls haven't moved in months and have never felt down that way before. It's impossible for her to have anywhere to fall from when she was originally placed and landed onto a hanger shelf. All of my dolls were crammed together, but none of them were shifted as much as an inch. The only way she could have fallen without disturbing the other dolls was to fall forwards, but she fell at an angle of 60 degrees. There's no way. I called my dad, and he just laughed at me and called me a weenie. But he did put my dolls into the attic and went to bed. Only minor things happened after that, like seeing someone walk across the doorway into the bathroom, but no one was there. The dogs going nuts for no reason, doors opening or random sounds. We've since moved, but I still get the chills when thinking about stepping into that house. I know this sounds far-fetched, but it feels good to share. I felt bad for the next people who have to move into that house, because that little girl is their problem now. They'll figure that out soon enough. I was a 12-year-old girl who loved to play video games. Me, being much younger then, wasn't aware of the dangers online, but soon I would be. One night in November, I was at my grandpa's and decided to get on Clash of Clans because I was quite bored. Whenever we would go to my grandparents' house, I would be on Clash of Clans for hours talking to strangers. That one night, I met a boy named Lewis on there. Even though I was only 12 and it was online, I instantly had a crush on him. He liked Def Leppard, which was, and still is, my favourite band. He played the electric guitar, and I played the electric guitar too. We just had so much in common, but he claimed that he was 16, almost 17, so I lied and claimed I was 15. There were some warning signs from the start that I didn't notice until I looked back on the whole situation. He claimed to live in Berlin, Germany, and said that his dad had a job for an oil company that was connected to Houston in some way, which I lived in. Lewis said his dad came to Houston during the summer, and that we should meet up sometime, because that's where I lived. But later, about a year after, when I told my mum after everything that had happened, she did research for days and couldn't find one oil company that was in Houston, Texas, or that was connected to Berlin, Germany. She even looked into ones that were previously shut down. Another strange thing was that Lewis was one of his many gaming accounts. Like, how many do you need? He claimed that his first name was Michael, and that his middle name was Lewis. He had about 4 accounts, all named after his first, middle and last name, and then a 4th one named Mikey. After about a month of talking to him online, he asked if I wanted to be his girlfriend. I said yes, and it only lasted about a week, because every girl that joined our clan, he would ask if they had kick, and would constantly flirt with them. After about a month, we got back together and exchanged Uvu accounts. One of the weirdest things that I noticed then was that he would constantly change his profile picture. And when he did, they were all different people that looked slightly similar. But we continued talking, and my parents began to get suspicious that I was constantly only on Uvu and Clash of Clans, so they looked into it. They didn't like that I was speaking to strangers, so they erased both apps. Just to help you understand, my parents had a passcode to download apps that I didn't know, so I couldn't download apps without their permission, and then typing in the passcode. Once they erased both apps, there was no way for me being able to talk to Michael. About 3 months without having Clash of Clans or being able to speak to Michael on Uvu, my iPhone had a new update that made the passcode for apps have a glitch. It made it to where I could re-download any app that I had in the past. So I re-downloaded Clash of Clans, but not Uvu, because my parents deleted my account on there as well. I told Michael to download an app that I had called QuizUp, because it was the only app that I had that had a private chat room. I didn't have any social media then, and that was the closest I had to it. On QuizUp, it would automatically show your location on your account, and other users could see it. When I first saw Michael's account, because it was new, his location was automatically set to Houston, Texas. Like I said, it's set automatically, and you could change it if you wanted to, even if you didn't live in the area it was set to. Then a few minutes after, it changed to Berlin, Germany, which is where he claimed he lived. I thought perhaps it was a glitch, but in the back of my mind I knew it wasn't. His location was automatically set to Houston, so that meant he was in Houston, where I live, and I knew that he was lying. Keep in mind that Houston is one of the worst places for people being taken, and unfortunately, I was stupid and kept talking to him. He eventually started messaging me quite obscene things that made me very uncomfortable, but I felt like it was the only way to make him stay with me, so I played along with it. Like I said, he was always flirting with girls, and I wanted to please him, so that he wouldn't online cheat on me. We'd talked for about 3 months, and one night I forgot to log out my account. My parents checked my phone every night, and that night they found my account. I was 13 this second time I was caught talking to Michael. My parents were extremely upset because I was talking to someone that I had already been told not to speak to, and on top of that, we were sexting. My mum decided to make a fake account with an attractive girl as her profile to see if Michael would stay faithful to me, as even if he did, they wouldn't let me talk to him. And of course, he wouldn't. That girl on my mum's account was gorgeous. Whenever he was talking to my mum's fake account, he contradicted himself so many times. He said he was moving to Texas for his dad's job, which him and I had talked about and were planning to meet whenever he came. He spoke about how excited he was to come to America because he'd never been in the US before. Then he said that his hometown was Houston, Texas, even though he'd never been here before. That was weird. And whenever he was moving, he messaged my mum when he was getting on the airplane and when he got to Houston. He claimed it took 3 hours, which is absolute rubbish, as it takes anywhere between 10 to 10.5. Things were getting way too suspicious, so my parents reported him to QuizUp to look into his account. He was talking to over 60 girls, and they were all obviously more than friends. My parents got help from QuizUp and had everything in my account wiped out and made sure that it was gone. Then, my parents reported Michael to Crime Stoppers. Michael ended up being a Hispanic male in his 40s, living in Houston, Texas, working for people who take other people. I don't know all of the details because it's hard for my parents to talk about it. I'm just grateful that my parents caught me, because me and Michael were supposed to meet up the week after I got caught. It's hard to know what would have happened to me if my parents never picked up that phone that night. I would be gone. I'm 14 now, almost 15, and my parents are starting to trust me again, and are slowly giving me privileges. I finally got Snapchat, but we share the account, and my phone is heavily monitored, even more than it was before, but you can't blame them. I now know the dangers online, and I'm never going to make the same mistake again. I live in Germany, in a pretty small village. I think there are about 2,500 people living here. The next bigger cities are both 15 kilometers away, although they can be reached by bus fairly easily. Me and my friend Andrew were usually hanging around in the village until morning dawn on weekends. We'd grab our guitars and sit on the parking lot of the small grocery store or on the schoolyard of the middle school. Both are a few dozen meters away from the next building, so we're able to jam without annoying anybody. One night we sat there, cracked some beers, and were in a pretty good mood, writing our songs and singing some covers. You know how it is, teenagers right before their 20s. It was around 2 or 3 in the middle of the night, when we noticed a silhouette walking towards us from the main street. Our eyes have adapted to the dark, and we were seeing a young man, not saying anything to us, but instead moving pretty fast. He was wearing all dark clothes, a dark hoodie, and a dark backpack. I think he didn't see us, since the main street has bright street lights and we were sitting in the dark, but he sure as hell did hear us. Me and Andrew looked at each other, a bit confused, as he seemed altered. The guy stopped about 2 meters before reaching us and said, "Hey guys, mind if I sit with you for a while?" He seemed shady. My body told me not to trust this guy. It honestly told me to book it, but I didn't. Instead, he was engaging in our conversation, talking about music for a few minutes. He then said something strange. "Man, it feels good to talk to actual people again. Are you guys German? I told him I was half Russian. Andrew is German. He told us he was from Arabia. He moved to Germany with his parents. He proceeds to tell us all about him. You know, the police is after me, they want to put me in jail. I looked at Andrew and he looked at me. I wasn't sure if this guy was lying about it, but he had proof. Damn, he had some good proof for that. Look, he said, and opened his bag, pulling a transparent bag out of it. It had enough green for a college party of 50 people, maybe more. We thought he would start to offer it. Instead, he pulled out another bag with some white/yellowish stuff in it. Not too much. This one was full. Once, he said. I was supposed to sell it. Instead, I started taking it myself. And now, people had found out. The police, the guys I owe money to. I haven't talked to people for days, and I'm thirsty and high all the time. Look, guys. He pulled out a handgun. Maybe I should end it right here. I've nowhere to go. I was shaking on the inside, but I was afraid to show fear. I did not know what this guy was up to. Was he seriously that high? He looked at us, laughed, well, more like exhaled through his nose, and packed his things away. This would be wrong, he said. I can't really remember much from that point. I remember him walking away after, and wanting to shake hands with us. He thanked us for talking to him, and strolled away into the woods. My assumption, to the next village about 3 kilometers away. We waited for him to walk a good distance, and decided to get home as quickly as we could without drawing any attention. He said something like, "You wouldn't rat me out, right?" So we tried to make it look like we stayed there. We were afraid he would follow us otherwise. All the way home, we checked behind us to see whether he were following or not. He wasn't. We made it out of this, and I did not report him to the police, and my friend did neither. We were just too scared. We told him our names out of fear, which was a stupid thing to do, and we were afraid he could trace us back. We do hope, however, to never meet him again. Back in the late 90s, my best friend was getting married. As her maid of honor, it was my job to throw her a bachelorette party. Instead of the regular humdrum get liquored up and see naked men party, I decided to do something a little different. Not to mention, she was the only one who was 18 at the time, so there weren't many party options. The company my dad worked for at the time owned land that they had a ranch on, complete with cows, and out in the middle of nowhere. I had been there with my family on quite a few occasions, and I loved it out there. I decided that we should go out there, have a bonfire, maybe drink a little, and since we both loved it, we could fish in the lake that the mines had dug up. That was the plan anyway. I told Renee about my plan for her party, and she seemed to think that it was a fun idea, since we didn't truly want to hang out with a bunch of people anyway. She was going to bring her cousin April, and I was going to bring my niece Tony. We had spent the past 2 years hanging out all the time anyway, and had grown quite close. When I say niece, I know some of you will automatically think she was about 4 years old, but she was only 2 years younger than I. Since we all still lived with our parents, we had to come up with something better than, "Hey guys, we're gonna go hang out in the middle of nowhere and have a bonfire on a piece of property that may or may not be safe for 4 teenage girls." so we said we were going bowling. I was driving an old Chevy truck, and Renee was driving a Mustang, which, by that time, was already 8 years old. At about 6 p.m., Renee and April showed up at my house, and we loaded up my truck and got on the road. Tony riding with me, and Renee and April in her car. I'm still thankful that Renee chose to drive her car and follow me instead of riding with me. We drove for about 45 minutes, slowly watching the town become nothing but trees and fields on both sides. A herd of cows or an orange grove here and there. We lived in Florida, so everything was flat, and you could see for miles. The sun started disappearing, and finally it was completely dark. I got to the end of a very long highway, and I took a right. I couldn't remember the name of the dirt road I was supposed to turn on, but I knew I would recognize it when I saw it. And I did. That is when it gets weird. The minute I turned on the dirt road that led to the ranch, I saw smoke. Being February in Florida, I just thought it was dry dirt surrounding me. No such luck. The truck was smoking underneath the hood. I stopped and got out and popped the hood. Sure enough, there was a small fire. I can't tell you what started it, but I can tell you that it was burning. It may have been wires or hoses or just whatever. I'm not an under the hood kind of person. Renee and April pulled up behind me and came up to see what was wrong. The four of us were throwing dirt on the fire, and we finally got it put out, and Renee pulled her car in front of my truck to face it with the headlights on. We still couldn't really see anything, so we just stood there trying to figure out what to do. We finally decided to pile into Renee's car and find a gas station to get some water, because that's what you do when there's a fire. You look for water. We drove for a good 20 minutes before we saw the bright lights of a gas station. We pulled in, and we couldn't believe how bright this thing was. For being out in the middle of nowhere, it lit up like the 4th of July. We all walk in and head straight for the cooler and find water. All four of us grab a gallon of water and then find some grub for ourselves. We went to the counter, and there's a woman working there. I remember thinking how pretty she was. She had light blonde hair and clear, deep blue eyes. Man, she's too pretty to be working at night at a gas station in the middle of nowhere, I thought. When we put all 4 gallons of water on the counter, she asked what we needed with all the water. Renee told her, and she said, "Hang on a sec, my husband's a mechanic. I'll call him and see what he says." Convenient, huh? She pulled out a telephone from under the counter. It was an old rotary-style phone, which seemed weird to me at the time. So she called him, and he said that as long as the fire was out, go ahead and fill it up with water, and he was sure it would start. Now as I'm saying this, I'm wondering how he was sure that it would start. We didn't even know what was under the hood that was on fire to be able to tell him, nor did he know how bad the fire was. He also said that if it didn't start, to come back to the store and have his wife call him, and he would meet us out to where we were and fix it. We thanked the cashier and left. When we got back in the car, we felt a little better and started talking. Renee said she loved the black and white checkered gas pump. She said they almost looked like cows. I asked what she was talking about. She said, the gas station, the one we were at. No, they were green. The whole place was green and white. April and Tony thought we were both crazy, as April had seen red and Tony had seen blue. We got really quiet again, and finally Tony asked what the woman looked like. I gave them my version, adding that she was some tall model. Renee had seen dark brown hair. Tony had seen dirty blonde, and said the girl was short. I can't remember what April said, but hers was also different. We argued, and just finally let it go. We got back to the truck, added water until it was overflowing, got inside, and it started right up, with no hesitation at all. We were all so happy because now, as long as we got home without anything terrible happening, none of our parents would ever know what had happened. As for the truck, I thought I'd just tell my dad that there was a fire at the bowling alley, but I was able to limp the truck home. On the way home, there was a car behind me the entire time, so of course I thought it was Renee and April. This was before everyone had cell phones, so we weren't calling to make sure. Finally, we get home and pull into my yard and park the truck. Tony and I had been pretty quiet on the way home, partially because we were trying to make sense of what happened at the gas station, and partially because we were praying the truck would get us home. I expected Renee to pull in right behind me, but she didn't. Tony and I decided she must have stopped for gas, so we waited a little while for her to arrive. Finally, after 20 minutes, she pulled up, and she was angry. "Why are you so mad?" I asked her. "Because you left us and we got lost," she yelled. "But you weren't behind us the entire time?" I yelled back now, also annoyed. "Renee, when we pulled off the dirt road, you were behind us. There was no other traffic out there. You turned with us back onto the highway. I saw you. I was literally a straight shot from there. How could you have gotten lost?" "I don't know. I followed you off the dirt road and I turned left when you did, and then I saw you turn onto another road." "I never turned onto another road until I turned onto this street," I said. She just looked at me like I was crazy, and we decided to tell my parents we were back and that we were going to Denny's. We were hungry, and we thought that maybe we could find a booth and talk this out over there. When we got to Denny's, we ordered some food and started talking. "Where did you end up when you saw us turn off the highway?" asked Tony. "I don't know where it was," said Renee in her shaky voice. "We ended up at this store/bar thing, and since it was the only thing we had seen for miles, we had to go in and ask for directions." Renee and April had gone into the store, practically hanging on to each other. They said that when they walked in, everyone turned to stare. The place got dead quiet, and they both got more scared than they had ever been. Renee said that she went up to a counter and asked the woman behind it how to get back to our town. Renee and April said the woman laughed and said that she was a long way from home. They both said her laugh and the general atmosphere of the place made them feel like this was somewhere they should have never been, and they should have never have known about. Just not a good vibe altogether. However, she told them how to get back, and they pretty much ran into the car as fast as they could and left. The four of us sat in the back of the booth for a few hours, going over what happened that night. How we couldn't agree on what the woman looked like. How we couldn't agree on what the store looked like. How we couldn't even agree on the size of the inside of the store or how it was set up. We were retracing our steps from the moment we walked in. Okay, there was a display of chips on the right as you walk in, a set of coolers on the side, and the back wall. The counter was on the left, and it was kind of on a pedestal, so the cashier stood way taller than the rest of us. Needless to say, nobody agreed with that. Everyone had their own version of what the store looked like. Now I know that we all walked into the store. I know that we all spoke to that woman, and our story should not have differed so dramatically. Finally, we decided to call it a night and headed home. The next morning I went out to check the damage on the truck. I popped the hood with the other 3 girls standing right next to me, and since we had just ended up staying the night together, we were in shock. The truck looked fine, the wires looked fine, there was nothing charred or even black, no holes in the hose, nothing. It looked like there had never been a fire at all. Fast forward 6 years later, Renee and I were talking about the events of the day, and just on a whim we decided to drive out there and have a look. After I showed her the gate that led to the ranch, she said, "Let's go find the gas station again." I agreed, and we drove up and down that road for so long. No matter how far we drove, we couldn't find anywhere a gas station, or where it could have been. There was nothing. It was like it never existed. The only store I ever remember being out there was a small grocery store that I always thought looked like a log cabin. My family would go to this store when we were at the ranch if something came up and we needed food or girly supplies. I knew right there where the store was, but it was not the only one we had gone to that night. I asked Renee if she could remember the name of the store, and she said it was Pioneer Gas. I came home that day and Googled it, and finally found a company called Pioneer Gas that was based in Alaska, nowhere near Florida, and asked my dad, brother, and both of my sisters if they remember any other stores aside from the log cabin grocery store, and they all said no. Tony passed away in '07, and April got into Jesus so much that she had no contact with anyone that's not a part of her church right now. So it's just me and Renee who truly know what happened that night. This is probably close to 10 years back. Myself and my mother were visiting her sister in the north of the country, a few hundred miles from where we lived. We had left with the intention of spending a long weekend. My aunt and her family lived close to a road unofficially called the Murder Hole. This was the name given to it by locals, as it was a frequent haunt for highwaymen. Their house was really nice, but it was literally in the middle of nowhere, at least a mile from the next house, and miles away from the nearest town or shop. As we got close to my aunt's, a huge summer storm hit. Torrential rain, thunder, and lightning. The house was undergoing massive interior renovation at the time, which meant my mum and I would be spending the night crashing in the living room, as all the spare bedrooms were out of commission. The storm was so bad, the workmen actually delayed leaving until it calmed down enough for them to brave the roads. When they did leave, we spent most of the evening on the back porch, watching the storm before we turned in for the night. I crashed on the couch, while my mum took a leather divan-type sofa that was placed directly under the window that faced the driveway. Late into the night, I woke up feeling very uneasy, as if I were being watched. I opened my eyes but didn't get up. I remember a weird sensation creeping up my neck. I turned my head towards where my mum was sleeping and felt my blood chill. A black figure stood at the window, his hands up to the glass, as if he was trying to see if anyone or anything was in the room. If it wasn't for the window, he would have been able to reach out to my mum. The driveway had a very powerful light fixed on a pole at the edge of the front yard. My mum, exhausted from all the driving, was completely out, despite the figure being no more than 18 inches from her face. The figure continued to slowly scan the room, then stopped suddenly, as if he had just seen me. No light was cast into the house, so the room was completely pitch black. The storm had gotten worse, and thunder and lightning was striking frequently, as if, on cue, a lightning strike hit and lit up the inside of the living room for the briefest moment. The figure left his vantage point and started walking towards the right-hand side of the house, where there was another window, offering another view of the living room. I waited until the figure was out of sight and slid off the couch, scuttling into the doorway just off the living room and out of the view of the second window. I peeked from behind the wall and could see the figure at the second window. By this stage, I was freaked and unsure of what to do. Lightning hit again, and the figure's head snapped right to where I was hiding. I remember being almost frozen, feeling his eyes were locked onto me, even though I couldn't see them. He left the second window and headed back towards the first. I somehow managed to move, running to the stairway in the corner of the room that led up to the bedroom of Mum's aunt. I burst in and shouted that there was a man outside looking in. Once over the initial surprise of me waking them up in such a panic, the husband, a large man in his own right, jumped up, summoned his two eldest sons who were a couple of years older than me, found two cricket bats, and marched down the stairs. The rest of the family and myself followed warily. My mother, having been woken up by the commotion, met us at the bottom of the stairs, having just been passed in the hallway by her sister's half-naked husband, trotting a cricket bat and marching out into the storm. I explained what happened, but could tell my mother was equally part skeptical as she was shocked. We waited for what seemed like an eternity, in the darkness, as no one thought, or perhaps dared, to turn on a light. Mum's friend tried to reassure us that it was just a late-night traveller who had broken down or perhaps gotten lost. Her husband and son returned after a minute or two. The husband went as far as to get changed and check the grounds before he hopped into his car and drove the road a few miles in both directions. There was nothing. There had been no sound of a car leaving the driveway or any physical evidence of anyone being outside. This did little to reassure me, as I was unable to shake the feeling of being watched that had originally woken me. We barely managed a night's sleep before we gathered our things to set out the next morning. My mother was convinced I had imagined the whole thing and told her sister so by way of apology. This annoyed me at first, although I knew it was the most logical explanation for them, as no one else had seen the figure. Looking to forget the whole experience, I did not argue the matter. Mum went to the car wanting to get an early start on our plans for the day. I quickly popped my head into the house to say my own goodbyes and apologized for waking them up last night. Our car horn sounded, and my aunt's husband remarked my mum was getting impatient, which was unlike her. I shrugged it off, but the car horn kept blaring, with two long continuous beeps, and a third final one which was a bit shorter. I went to the side of the house where the car was parked. It hadn't moved, and sat with all the doors closed apart from the passenger door on the driver's side, which was wide open. It was as I got closer to the car that I saw my mum, slumped over the steering wheel. Frantically, I pulled open the door and tried to shake her awake. I found the pulse on her neck, which seemed strong, but she seemed to be completely unconscious. I pulled her out of the car and shouted for help as I carried her to the house. I set her on the same couch I slept on the night before, and with some help of her friend, tried to bring her around from what we assumed was a random fainting spell. Thankfully, she revived quite quickly, and was quite embarrassed by the fuss she felt she had caused. She didn't remember passing out, or even getting in the car. We also found her watch had somehow frozen at roughly the same time that she got into the car, and it started working again later that day. This happened in 2012/2013, when I was 9 or 10. I was a hardcore Minecraft player, and I still play occasionally. It was also back in the day when Skype was the OG, and Kik was every 10-year-old's most used app. I made a bunch of online friends, and we'd frequently talk on Skype, Kik, and play Minecraft together. A lot of the friends were way older than me, 14 to 16, and either in Australia or America. But I was definitely closest to a boy called Richard. Richard was 16 and lived in the States. He had a strange obsession with cats and became one of my best friends quickly. We'd have huge Skype groups, play Minecraft together all the time, and talk insanely often. As someone who had recently moved schools and was subject to bullying, I needed any friend I could get, and at the time he was one of the nicest people I knew. I was also really close to a bunch of girls in our group who were very sweet, and I wish I still talked to them. I don't know what the time frame of this was, but by some point Richard had dated, fought, and broken up with almost all of our female friends. At one point, me and him even dated for a little bit, but neither of us acknowledged that it was really dating. At the time, I didn't realize how weird what he was doing was, but in hindsight, it became apparent that he was manipulative, abusive, and downright crazy. As a 10-year-old, I was naive. I didn't know any better, and I was very vulnerable, stupid, and gullible. I think that Richard isolated me from the rest of our group once he fell out with all of the girls he dated. In turn, some of our male friends had also pulled out and started to distance themselves from him as well. I was on his side because I was again stupid and naive, and I defended him. We fought regularly, but he used tactics like guilt-tripping, gaslighting, and manipulation to make sure I did not stop being friends with him. A few times, he'd threatened to end himself, sending pictures of pills that he was threatening to take, and put me in his note. I don't remember if he threatened self-harm, but I do know that I'd stay up late for hours between the ages of 9 and 10 to 13, crying, pleading, and ruining my sleep schedule and mental health, trying to help him and apologize for whatever he said I had done wrong. Slowly, our friendship fell apart. We fell out a lot. I began self-harming, and I attempted to end my own life. My mental health was getting worse and worse. When I was around 13, we fell out for a while. I don't remember when this was, whether it was before the aforementioned fallout or after, but at some point he informed me that our friend, Judy, who was a similar age to me, had ended herself. To this day, I am unsure whether it's true or not. This was another way for him to get to me, and sometimes that information keeps me up at night. Then when I was 14, in early 2017, things started up again. I received a message from him. He wanted to see how I was. At this point, if he was telling the truth, he would have been 20, and I was still pretty naive, and I started talking to him. Very quickly, the conversation turned to him asking me about my self-harm. I don't know why. I don't know if it was something I said that sparked the conversation. But all I know is he started asking questions. He wanted to know if I did it on my thighs. At that point, I had never even thought of doing it there. No, I don't do it there, I said. He didn't believe me. He wanted proof. Something very vivid I remember him saying was along the lines of, "Seeing is believing." I kept telling him no, I didn't do it there, and telling the truth. Whatever, it didn't matter what I said, he still didn't believe me. "Don't you trust me? We've been friends for so long. How can you not trust me? That really hurts." He used his usual tactics to guilt-trip me. Essentially, he wanted photos of my thighs and feet. He said his girlfriend did it on her feet, which even at the time I thought was very odd. So, being guilt-tripped and vulnerable, I sent him the images. Mostly just to shut him up, but also because I thought, if I didn't, I'd hurt him, and I'd be in the wrong. It was only a few days later, maybe not even a full 24 hours, before it settled in that something didn't feel right. I ended up confronting him, getting angry that he'd made me feel that way and be so hypocritical, saying that what he did hurt me. He ignored me and told me, if you don't have anything nice to say, then I won't/shouldn't bother replying. At that point, I blocked him. I deleted Kik, and I never spoke with him again. I'm still pretty messed up because of it. I go to therapy, and I have severe mental health issues that I partially blame on him. I don't trust a lot of people. I freak out whenever Kik or Skype is mentioned, and hearing his name or anyone with his name makes me feel anxious. I frequently get paranoid about him. At the time, he said him and his girlfriend wanted to move to my country, and I was helping him look at cheap apartments. I am now extremely paranoid that he will come to my country, and one day I'll see him. In the middle of last year, he sent me a link from another Skype account to a deserted website with only a single ad on it, which freaked me out a lot. A part of me hopes that he's changed, that maybe, just maybe, he lays awake at night wondering, why the hell did I do that? Part of me hopes he's sorry. Part of me hopes he regrets what he did, and that he's as broken as me. But the rest of me has a suspicion that he probably isn't. Either way, he's creepy as hell. Richard, let's not meet again. I also think it's important that I shared this story. If anyone is making you uncomfortable in any way, whether it be by threatening to do something horrific like end themselves, or asking you to take pictures that you don't like, or trying to hurt you in any way, get out of there. I don't care if you think something bad will happen. You're more important than them in this situation. Moving into a new house can be a daunting experience for most. Me and my sister were very anxious about our new place. My dad had just been made redundant from his job, and we couldn't afford to rent the place we were living in any longer. A friend of our dad's had a place in the forest. It was an old house, very big, but because it was out in the boonies and needed a bit of maintenance, my dad's friend was willing to give it to us very cheap, on the condition that we tried to fix it up. He was a wealthy man, so for him, I think so long as the house was maintained a little bit, it was unimportant. Nonetheless, we were a bit skeptical. We were city girls all our life, and to move to the remote countryside was a culture shock that we hadn't anticipated. However, making the most out of the situation, we tried to adapt to our new environment. One thing that we found particularly creepy were our bedrooms. Damp, dark, and uninviting. No matter how much I tried to paint the walls, add brighter light bulbs into the light fixtures, did the eerie feeling not go away, and I never really felt at home there. Anyway, that was the background. On to the story. My room was your average size room. It was square in shape. I painted the walls pink and white, and it had a closet. Now, the closet was nothing special, but I always had a strange feeling from there. Please bear in mind that this was in one of the corners of the house. My room was just always my room, and I never really felt comfortable. I always felt like I was being watched when I'd sleep. I'd sometimes wake up in a sweat, or have very bad dreams repeatedly. There'd be times where I'd go sleep over at friends' houses, and this would never happen. But the moment I was asleep in my bedroom in particular, did the bad dreams and strange feelings surge. This was also true if I slept in a different room of the house, for example, crashing on the sofa. I was completely fine. I ended up using the sofa far more than I did my own room, but my parents weren't too happy about it, so I tried using the sofa less and less, as much as it jeopardized my sleep. I had just bought a whole load of things from the mall. A lot of it things I didn't really need, and upon realizing this and being far too lazy to return them, did I just add them to a box I had in the corner of the room and tell myself that it was time I put it in the cupboard or closet. So I picked up the heavy box and started pushing it towards the end of the closet. It was only then that I heard a creak and a snap. Several of the planks that had been covering up whatever was underneath had given way. My first instinct was fear, because this house, as I mentioned before, was rented to us by a family friend, and if we were damaging the property, which was the opposite of what we were supposed to be doing, my parents, and therefore me, could get into trouble. So I removed the box at once and assessed the damage. It didn't look so bad, but using the flashlight from my iPhone, was I able to identify something beneath my room. I looked, and there were some stone stairs going down that had been covered by the space that the closet occupied. I didn't know what to do with this information. Should I tell my dad, or should I explore? Now I was scared of the room, at night mostly, but during the day that feeling wasn't there, and I wondered if it had anything to do with what lay underneath my closet. So, bravely, I started pulling apart the loose and weak planks from their original position. I only needed to take off 2 or 3 more, until there was more than enough room for me to go down. So I did. I went all the way down, and it was a lot longer than I had anticipated. It felt like at least a story and a half. When I got to the bottom, it was pitch black, and there were no light switches here. I fumbled for my phone and dropped it in the dark. The flashlight was on, and it revealed a dark little dingy room. I kept looking around, seeing if there was anything of interest, but there didn't seem to be anything. Just as I was going back up the stairs, did I feel a cold chill run up my spine, and instinctively I started turning around to see if I could see anything, whilst keeping my hand with my phone outstretched, to not only see if anything was here, but to maybe get the chance to record it. The feeling didn't go away, and when I heard a strange noise coming from this empty place, did I bolt it out of there and ran all the way back to my room. I was in tears. I don't think I'd ever felt so much fear in my entire life, and I just wanted to go back to our old home. I told my sister about it, and the next day we went down with tape, a few lights, and a few other bits and bobs in order to see properly down there. It was a very uninteresting room, to be fair, with nothing in it, just a strange and odd presence. After that, I started sleeping better. I wonder if it had anything to do with discovering that secret room. I don't know what its purpose was, or why it was there to begin with, but it makes for a good story, and certainly a handful of creepy situations. And after the room feeling empty and calmer for a few years, did I think that whatever was here before had gone away, until it returned with a vengeance. There were times when the fear would be so indescribably big that I'd have to leave the house itself and visit friends. It was terrifying. Everything came to a close when one night I was just hanging up my school uniform for the next day in the closet, and all of a sudden, a gust of wind pushes me and slams the closet door shut. The originator of the gust of wind was the closet itself, as all my doors, including my inside hallway door, were closed, so there's no way that amount of wind came from anywhere inside, because it simply didn't. And I think, but I'm not sure, that I heard my name being whispered through the wind as it passed through, but I don't know 100%. After telling my mum and dad about this, did they start getting concerned? They too had had strange stuff happen to them in their closet, but I was too scared to ask, as mine had been acting up far too much. My parents spoke and decided that they would try and get a smaller place in the city, and that country life really wasn't for them. As it was my dad's friend, we moved out pretty quickly, and were actually back in the same building but a different apartment, which was familiar but nicer. Here's the kicker though. A few years later, we're having a barbecue in a different house now. My dad had got promoted since then and we can afford somewhere bigger. He's talking to his friend and asks what happened to the house we lived in. He says that the next people who rented it kept complaining about seeing something in the closet, a shadow moving very fast, which they couldn't see properly, and that their daughter started complaining about the little girl coming out of the closet at night and trying to speak to her. She said there was something strange about her face, but I never got that detail. All I know is that there's something weird going on in that house, specifically the closet, and I'm not sure what it is. Could it be a young girl's restless spirit caught within the confines of the room underneath the closet? Who knows? I'm just glad I never saw her, and hope the restless soul can find peace. I am a 27-year-old female. At the time this occurred, I was a senior in high school, angsty and steady into partying. For this story, I need to let you know about someone called Kay. Kay almost cost me my life, and I never want to see her again. She'd grown up privileged, given anything she ever wanted. Her parents adopted her 5 cousins, and this is when she started to rebel. Her parents, well off, started to pay less attention to her, so Kay had all the freedom in the world. At this time, this incident occurred. Kay was 18, and I had just turned 18. We were headed to a kickback at these guys' house, and it was nothing more than a little bit of the green stuff. Now, I've done my share in smoking it, popped a few pills here and there, and I had just casually tried ecstasy the summer prior. However, I was planning on staying sober. She picked me up, we stopped to buy cigs at a gas station, and bought a fountain drink, one with the straw and everything. This is crucial for this story later. We arrived at the apartment, and everyone is smoking, including Kay, but I declined. She would always say stuff about me, how she never wanted to be high alone, complaining about how I never got as high as her, so I obliged, and I cleared the bong. Off her hit, not even taking a full hit. She asked for a drink of my soda, so I handed it to her. We had it for a good minute. I had my head turned, talking to someone at the kickback, and when I looked back at Kay, she was messing with my straw. I didn't think much of it, as she handed it back to me. Within 30 or so minutes, I started to feel intensely high, to the point that I needed to escape from the group. I go out front to smoke a cigarette, only to find that I couldn't stand, so I laid on the front porch. Then all of these dark thoughts flashed through my mind. I felt so sick, like my stomach was being torn open. I couldn't stand. I had to crawl to the bushes to throw up. I thought to myself, all of this from clearing a bong? So I laid back on the porch. The apartment was located on a busy street in the city. I also thought about running into traffic because I felt like I was dying. So I gave myself 2 options. I could run into traffic, have a car hit me, and end this horrible pain I was in. Or I could get some help, maybe flag someone down. My mind wasn't in the right state. I knew nobody at the kickback would take me seriously, and I knew something was horribly wrong. I thought about calling my mum. I must have dialed her number and hung up about 5 times. Finally, I called her and told her what happened. After that, I didn't know why I was so high. Nobody else was feeling the way I felt. What seemed like an eternity later, Kay came out looking for me. As I'm puking my guts into the bushes, she asks me if I want to get some food. I asked her if she was serious, as she laughed as I puked. What I didn't know is that my mother had called my older brother to collect me, since he lived close to where I was. He showed up with a machete, ran inside and threatened people. He didn't know who gave me what. It wasn't until I got home that my brother took one last look at my eyes and noticed how dilated my pupils were, so they rushed me to the ER. After more puking, my memory goes a bit fuzzy. I just remember asking my sister-in-law if I was going to die, and telling her that I was afraid. They ended up sedating me due to the fact that I was yelling and threatening the nurses, which is extremely out of character for me. They did a tox screen and found MDMA, along with a host of other things in my system. I'm assuming the other stuff were the ones used to make up the ecstasy. Now, this is all frightening and everything. However, what I found out a few days later shocked me to my core. Kay had been to a house party the next night. Somebody there had said she was passing out free E to 4 different people. Of those 4 people, 3 had grand mal seizures and had to be taken to the ER by ambulance. I'm assuming whatever she was giving out was a bad bunch. Remember when she asked me to have a drink of my soda? I'm assuming this is when she dropped the pill inside and it dissolved. She probably crushed it beforehand or something. I have no clue. But at this time in my life I hadn't done anything for quite a while, especially not that. Kay also went on to tell people that I was the one that slipped her the stuff, and she had to go to the hospital. She's a pathological liar and has to go to therapy for a long time for mental disorders. All of this happened because she wanted me to be high like her. I could have ended my own life because I wasn't in the right frame of mind, and this still affects me to this day. It sounds cliché, but I have a hard time trusting people. With this experience and among other things. I also don't like sharing drinks with friends. I get scared when I go out to a bar or club, fearing for the worst. I mean, if my own friend had done this to me, what's stopping a stranger? So I always guard my drink no matter what. And Kay, let's never meet again. This happened in Iraq in 2018. It was a very stormy day, and you could say thunder and sandstorm covered the whole sky, making it an orange color. The wind was so strong, making the doors open and close, making the wind slam roughly without stopping, making the windows slam roughly without stopping. And there was this howling sound, like screams and roars. I was alone in my house. My family were all at my grandfather's to visit. I was playing some games and trying to ignore the weather, and the sound was just getting stronger. It was creeping me out. After an hour of playing games, I heard someone knock at the door. I looked out the window towards the street and saw that no one was there. I thought it was the wind, so I ignored the sound and resumed what I was doing. But the knocking persisted. I returned to the door to see who it was. But before I even said who's there, I waited a moment, and there was a response saying in an old tune, "I'm an old man, can you let me in your house? I can't stand in such weather, I just can't handle it." After that, I opened the door. His whole appearance was strange and very odd. He put his long white beard and he wore very old clothes and a black and grey turban. He was putting some small cloth in his mouth as a mask to protect himself from the sandstorm. His right eye was so white, it looked like snow. He was a tall man, however his right hand was extremely dark, and he was wearing some strange rings that I have never seen before. And he had black fingers with 2 rings on each. It was very strange. He sits in the chair and I look at him and say, "Do you need something, sir? Perhaps water or tea?" He looked at me with a smile. "That would be really helpful. Bring me some." I get him what he asked for, and he thanked me for the drink. And after about 2 hours we spoke normally. I asked him who he was and why he was wearing such odd clothes, and about his dark hand, and he looked at me and smiled. "Since you are very kind with me, I will give you 2 gifts. One is to answer your question, and the other gift will be a sight and what will happen in the future." I looked at him, quite confused and curious. I wasn't sure about what he was saying. He told me that he was a sage, a hermit, a magician, a sorcerer, that he's many things and travelled from many parts of the Middle East, and he's seen many things. He said that his dark hand was one of the steps to becoming a magician, and it was to get struck by thunder or lightning in his hand, so he must put the hand on fire for a full day and then on water for 3 days, and in doing so gain control of the elements. About these strange-looking rings, he said each ring was a jinn, and inside they work as his servants. He asked if I wanted to know what would happen in the future. I looked at him and said yes. He told me that I would be moving to another country for a year, then one of my family members would die peacefully, and told me that the Middle East would have some problems, but it would be fixed years later, and told me that Europe and America will have disasters, especially America, concerning ice and fire. After telling me all of this, he began to walk to the exit door and began to leave, and told me that he would be back next year at the same time on the same day, thanked me for everything, and was gone. After that, everything he said came true. My grandmother died in the hospital. She was in a coma and her brain stopped. She was dead, the doctors say, and that she died without any pain. She looked so peaceful. And looking at the Middle East, there are problems. Hopefully, they'll be fixed soon. And America had very low temperatures which made it very cold, and almost freezing winds, as well as there being the Chicago forest fires. It seems like everything he said was coming true. I'm waiting to see if he'll return this year, and which omens he predicts for the future. About 2 years ago, me and my family moved from New Jersey to Florida for a fresh start. Before I start my encounter, I want to iterate my mental state at the time because it contributes to how I acted at the time of this story. So the night of the move, my mother got a call from a close family friend. She had just become pregnant and had started to have complications and feared she lost the baby. My mother, being the awesome woman she is, went over to help and watched her young son, and calm our friend down and told her to go to the hospital to be sure and get her checked out. She and her husband rushed to the hospital, and luckily they hadn't lost the baby. But it wasn't until 1 in the morning until my mother got back, and I was still up waiting for her to return. So yes, we were dead tired the next day, and we had to pack everything up for the long trip to our new home in Florida, while my father, who had slept through the whole ordeal that night before, was not. Anyway, I'm driving with my mother while my father is in another car, and I'm not exactly happy about the move. So tired and upset, we continued with our trip. We've always driven from New Jersey to Florida for years, and never had any weird experiences on the road. I'm not sure about my parents, but they've never talked about anything creepy in my 22 years of being alive, and I've traveled with them. And trust me, they love to tell me stories, and I do too. So when this happened, I was wholly unprepared for it. It certainly didn't help what happened the night before either. So we stop at one of the many stops on our way to Florida, and I think we were in the Carolinas or something near there when we stopped. Now, if you've never traveled before by car, a rest stop is a place like a civic center area. These places are for travelers who need a minute to stretch or go to the bathroom, or a place where they can safely rest for the night in their cars. These places are usually well lit and have vending machines for anyone who needs a snack or drink. It was late, maybe about 9 at night, and we stopped to stretch our legs and go to the bathroom. I wanted a few snacks, so I asked my mother for some. She gave them to me, and I entered the nice little enclosed area that contained the machines. So I'm standing there alone, picking what I want, when this woman comes in. She's short, skinny older woman who's dressed nice with bleached blonde hair. When I glance at her and smile politely, she comes right up to me and holds out her hand for a shake, and introduces herself. Dumbfounded, I shake her hand back, and stupidly told her my name. After that, she launches into this tale of woe about how she lost her wedding ring, had a head wound, and that her car was out of gas, and that she needed some money and other things that I honestly can't remember. I'm just standing there listening and trying to figure out how to get out of this situation. Now you have to understand this was literally the first time anyone had ever approached me at one of these stops, mostly because I think I don't have the most friendly of faces for people to approach. Even though I'm a girl, I'm tall at around 5'6", taller than most girls, especially this woman, with broad shoulders, and I resemble my father, who doesn't have the most welcoming of faces either, an accent. But me? I'm a bleeding heart, and never want to be rude to people. But in this situation, I would have been, if it hadn't been so out of the blue. When I'm in situations that are new to me, I tend to freeze up and can't think. I don't know how to act or what to do, as I'm not expecting it. As you can guess, I'm a big introvert and socially awkward, but I don't have a problem with telling people to go away. In this situation, I'm outright to panic, and I just want to get away from this weird woman. And I say weird because that head injury she mentioned, she didn't have one, not even a single bruise, and she was talking so fast and non-stop, I couldn't even tell her no. I can't help her, or even try. For some reason, being polite was more important than getting the hell away from her. So I'm standing there exhausted to my bones, about to shove what little money I have at her so that she just goes away, when my mother walks in. My badass of a mother comes right in. I'm taller than her, by the way, and says that I can't and tells me to come with her. The woman takes a step back, and I realize just how close she was. I hadn't even noticed she was steadily coming closer as she was talking. She tells my mother how beautiful and nice I am, when really I look like a greasy mess, because I don't care about my appearance when I'm taking a road trip. My mother doesn't really respond, and she has me by the arm walking towards the bathroom, asking if I'm okay. That woman got the hell out of there, and goes in the opposite direction of where her car was. Looking back on it all, I thought it was just weird, and I was certainly weirded out by it all. But I just thought whatever. But after listening to YouTube and reading Reddit posts, I realized how lucky I was 2 years later that the situation hadn't escalated. I think the reason she approached me was because my money was folded, and it looked like I had a lot more on me, when in reality I only had $6 to $7. And because it was probably obvious to her how tired I was, and how much of an easy score she could have gotten in my tired, grumpy state, she went for it. So if anyone hears this, I hope you aren't planning on traveling alone. But if you are, be careful. Even of the people who look completely normal. You can never be too careful, especially at the people looking for an easy score. So strange woman who was lying through her teeth, wanting to get the $6 out my hands, please, let's never meet again. This happened last year, while I was living with my boyfriend at the time, in an old 2-story house. The front door was downstairs and could be opened with a strong force even when locked. We then had initial stairs that led to basically another front door that locked a lot better. Still the most unsafe I felt in a house, even after I left this guy, Nigel, and moved into my own place in a shifty area of town. I couldn't break into that unit, but I certainly broke into the 2-story house a few times. I know, I should have just remembered my keys. So, it's a Sunday night. Nigel and I are watching TV in the lounge room, and there's a knock at the front door. I'm not really an unannounced visitor kind of gal, but Nigel had a few friends that would surprise visit after a binge. I looked at Nigel, and he shrugged, then sent me down to check it out in case it was one of those friends, so I could say he was asleep and send them on their way. I open the door, and there's no one. I call out a few times and don't get an answer, so I shut the door. I hear someone muttering and another knock, and something along the lines of, "I'm not gonna bite." This comment really annoyed me because it's night, and this is my damn place, and I don't like to be viewed as fearful. I open the door for round 2 and see a guy much taller than me, as I'm only 160 centimeters, so it's not that hard. A little wiry, but not too thin, and fairly decently dressed. He looked kind of perturbed that I had opened the door and proceeded to ask for the owner by name. I let him know, "Sorry mate, they're not here. We're renting off them," assuming that that would be the end of that, and glancing ever so slightly at the stairs, waiting for Nigel to come down and help me. This guy won't stop shifting from foot to foot, can't help but ensure he's moving at all times, and proceeds to argue a bit with me to produce Harry and Linda, the couple that owned the house I was renting. At this point, I started getting the impression he's not sober. I start to conclude the conversation and send old mate on his way, when he asks me if my partner's there. This instantly put my guard up. I replied with a positive, and he asked me to get him, let me know he's already met him, and that he needs to talk to him. I cocked an eyebrow and asked him how he knew my partner, especially considering he hadn't called him Nigel at all, but just referred to him as my partner. But I'm kind of glad I did, because he mentioned my housewarming. Nigel had told me that the night of our housewarming, after I had passed our upstairs, he was cleaning and some strange guy had let himself in and sat down at our back table without a word. Nigel asked who he was, and this guy decided to aggressively ask right back, stating he was a friend of Harry's. Nigel was pretty charming when he needed to be, and got him out without too much of a hassle, and relayed the story to me as more of a joke, so I never worried about it too much. But now, I was worried. This is when the tirade about Nigel's car started. He kept repeating, "I need to talk to your partner. I've seen him driving around town with my ex-missus and my kids." He even pointed to my boyfriend's car in the driveway. This rattled me for half a second, because Nigel's car was only one of the 3 of its model in our town. But the general demeanor of this guy, I had basically concluded he was high, and set me back on track. I told him it was time to leave, or I would call the police, and shut the door on his face. I raced upstairs with my phone out, dialed the number, and watched through the window to make sure he left. Nigel half-heartedly asked what was happening, claiming he couldn't hear anything. We could hear the neighbours half the time from our lounge room though, so this little sod didn't actually give two craps about my safety versus his laziness. I explained and then called our landlord. She knew exactly who he was and explained that he had been swallowed up by the wonderful world of meth and reportedly has been knocking on doors of the whole suburb asking if people knew where his ex and child were. Thankfully, I never saw him again, and I really hope he got some help. And to the people in the house now, I hope you don't have to meet him. A little background first. I'm really into gaming. I have a Steam account, and I have an Xbox 360, a PS3, Origin account, DS, and everything I could get my hand on really. This all happened when I was 15 to 17. I met my boyfriend at the time through Xbox. His name was Sam, and he was 10 months younger than me. We had been together for 8 months, and I was now 16 when we started having some issues. Fairly normal stuff, both stressing about exams and whatnot. Our other friend was an arse, constantly putting Sam down and trying to impress me. So he was having a blast that we were having problems, which put even more of a strain on us. Like I said before, we'd been having problems. I used the same name or variations of it for pretty much all my accounts on everything. Skype, Stream, Xbox, Twitter, and whatnot. And because of this, I often got random ads from, say, an Xbox friend, who looked me up on Steam when I mentioned I had an account, which I'm cool with. I have some awesome friends. Skype, on the other hand, I get random ads from pretty creepy people looking for pics. Because hey, I like the alias Miss Torture, so I refuse to change it. And I'm pretty friendly, and I accept all ads, deleting any creeps and keeping any who are just looking for a chat. And I've made some cool friends from doing this. Aiden added me on Skype around the time me and Sam were having issues. He was kind of creepy and would flirt, but would also talk about his single mother girlfriend with 2 kids. So I just kind of ignored it and used him to vent my problems with my relationship, and we'd just generally chat. Bear in mind I'm 16, and he's over 26, and would often make weird remarks and ask vulgar questions which I would ignore. He then found me on Steam, and I guess accepting his request gave him some kind of confirmation because he got a little bit weirder, but again I ignored it. Sam and I broke up and got back together, and whatever else happened, and our arse friend was kind of concerned about me talking with Aiden, as any friend would if he were a jerk. As was Sam, and I was getting really weirded out by him, so one day I just blocked him and deleted him off both Skype and Steam, and that was the end of it. Fast forward a few more months. Me and Sam had broken up. I'd been manipulated into a relationship with the arse friend, and I'd broken up with him after a month. I was pretty much alone. All my old friends were gone. Sam and his best friend had left our group when me and Sam split up. The other arse guy and his best friend left when I broke up with him, because I'm obviously a terrible person. And the rest of our group drifted apart, and suddenly Aiden appeared again. He got his friends to add me on Steam to talk to me, and asked to re-add him. I was concerned about this, because it seemed really weird that he'd do this out of the blue, but I started to give him the benefit of the doubt and re-added him. I was now almost 17. He started out okay, but still giving me all the creepy flirts. He suddenly 180'd me and asked me how I was doing with Sam. I gave him a brief overview that we weren't together anymore, and he started going on about a weird story that he, Aiden, was actually an undercover cop, and that Sam had been some 40-year-old trying to get me to meet up with him. He said he had Sam's file right there, and that I needed to be careful. I, of course, went straight to Sam, pasting the conversation as it was happening, because me and Sam had often webcammed, and would always be chatting over mic and whatever else. His voice cracked often, as most teenage guys' voices do, and it was generally fairly obvious that he was not lying about his age. I was understandably getting very upset that Aiden was saying all of these things about my ex, as we were still fairly neutral friends. Aiden was going on about this for a while, making up big words so that he sounded official and intelligent. I am in no way dumb. I know these words were completely made up, even going as so far as to Google definitions if I was unsure and coming up blank each time, because it was an invalid word. I eventually told him to piss off and leave me alone, blocked and deleted him. The friend he had told to add me sent me one last message from Aiden before I deleted him also, saying something along the lines of insulting me, saying he looked at my profile most days since I deleted him that previous year, and saying it doesn't matter that I deleted or blocked him, because he had multiple other accounts, some of which I was unknowingly friends with and spoke to often. Which I know isn't true, because at the time I didn't really talk to anyone on Steam. I don't know, it was really creepy at the time. The fact I was a minor and he was at least 10 years older was also weird. Or the gross flirting he tried to pull, while on the other hand, mentioning his girlfriend was also strange to me. A confused, upset, lonely girl who felt like the world was against her and just wanted a friend. I think I still have the chat log from the day he claimed to be an undercover cop, or whatever it was. But that's my story. I've turned 18 now, and recently discovered I have a friend in common with Aiden on Steam. They met through some obscure TF2 map, and though I've told the friend about all of this, he refused to remove Aiden because he's funny. Although I have blocked him, I'm concerned for my friend. The likelihood is he'll be fine though. He's a 6-foot 21-year-old built like a wall. He's Mexican, and Aiden is some guy who thinks he's a big deal, but he's just a small fish in some huge pond. And I really would rather not meet him again. To fully appreciate the background of this story, I need to give you information regarding where I lived. You see, we were in a temporary living situation. Our house had burnt to the ground, and we'd lost everything. But fortunately my parents had insurance, and they put us up in a temporary living situation. I had my own room, as the only child, and my parents had a different room. I was about 15 at the time, and that place always gave me the creeps. For real. I don't think a day would go by where I found myself in that area, where I wouldn't be terrified. The place itself wasn't too bad, but the situation and location weren't the best. But still, we knew it wouldn't last forever, so we didn't get too comfortable. Except for maybe in one aspect. You see, the clerk, or admin guy, who worked behind the counter of this motel, was quite nice, and whenever I'd get back from school, he'd always be on shift and try to strike up a conversation with me. Now, because we're living in a motel, he obviously has the key and can go into our room, which I personally find a bit creepy. So I started putting the do not disturb signs up, but my parents kept telling me to take it off because otherwise our room wouldn't be cleaned, which, to be fair, was necessary. A few weeks pass, and I'm still not feeling good. There's just something about this place that gives me the creeps. Every morning, I also get some free complimentary breakfast before I have to go to school. I remember this was a Wednesday. I tended to rush my homework in the morning, grab a few bits to eat, and plow through everything I possibly could, and think up excuses if I don't have enough time to finish. Now, the way this is set out is that the banqueting hall is right after the front desk, and from where I was sitting, I had a clear view of where the creeper guy was. So he gets a guest, they come and talk to him, and shortly after they leave, he leaves as well. I just assume it was something related to that family, and that his business was needed elsewhere. But I was wrong. I never saw him return, and when I went back up to my room, in order to just finish grabbing the rest of my books, did I get a very uncomfortable feeling. I stayed quiet for a minute, and could have sworn I heard breathing coming from the closet. It was the first time in my life that I felt true fear, and panic was engulfing me. I stood there stunned, unsure of what my next move should be. I looked at my wristwatch and noticed that time was running out, and that if I didn't leave soon, I wouldn't be able to make it to school on time and catch my bus. So, full of trepidation, did I creep forward to the closet and swing open the door, only to be met with this strange guy. I jumped, let out an audible scream, and he let out a scream as well. I was furious. I wasn't sure what he was doing in the room, but I was very, very upset. I scream for my parents, who come in from the other room, and yell at the guy, who is still in the closet, as he hadn't come out yet. My dad starts yelling at him, asking what the hell he's doing spying on a 14-year-old girl, to which he has no reply. After about 10 minutes of an onslaught of words from my father, does he get up from his crouched position, apologize, and walk back to the front desk, this time with a cue lagging behind. My dad tells me to go to school, so I do, and when I get back, the guy is gone. He never came back to work, and my dad refused to tell me what went down that day. But I have a good idea that my dad gave him more than a piece of his mind. So creepy peeping Tom, who was in my closet, let's not meet again. And I really hope you didn't see more than I wanted you to, weirdo. My parents' house got hit by a tornado when I was in high school. You don't realize how fast those things happen until you've been in that situation. We live in rural North Carolina. Not exactly Tornado Alley, but we do get some bad storms now and again. My dad had this habit of liking to sit out and watch thunderstorms come in. We were all inside where we hear him yelling for us to come out. We'd walk out and the sky would just look surreal. There were all kinds of black clouds sweeping towards our house at a disturbingly fast pace. When I say black, I don't mean really dark grey or steely blue. I mean black. Jet black clouds. Like an ink cloud from a giant octopus that squirted into the sky. I've never seen it before in my life, not even on a video, and hope to never see it again. So we were pretty freaked out by the clouds, and the wind was picking up. I mean, those clouds were moving fast. Someone, I think it was my mum, said something to the effect that maybe we should get inside just to be safe. But things started going crazy even before we could turn around. The wind goes from a 7 out of 10 on the windy scale to a 25 in about 3 seconds flat. We turned to the inside, and I'm the last to go through the door. I try to pull it closed behind me, but the wind is sucking the door open. I have to pull with both hands on the knob and jerk back with my full weight to get the door shut. At this point, it's been about 45 seconds since our dad originally called us outside. We run to the hallway and start throwing things out of the closets under the stairs and climbing in. The whole house is full of this absolutely indescribable roaring noise. It was like a jet was taking off on our roof, or a train was driving through the living room. It wasn't so much sound as a physical force. It made your head throb. It was so loud. You could feel it constantly in the pit of your stomach, like the boom from a loud bass speaker. But instead of having a beat, it was just constant. It felt like your eyeballs were quivering in your head. The pressure changes from the wind also screwed with your sense of balance. I kept getting the sense of vertigo that you feel when standing on top of a cliff looking down. It was an absolute sensory overload. We all jump under the stairs and shut the door when we realize we had left the dog out in the house. My mum opens the door and yells for the dog, which comes barreling into the closet like a bat out of hell. We shut the door, and at this point it's been maybe a minute and a half, just 90 seconds, since we were sitting in the kitchen chatting, and my dad yelled at us to come outside and look at these crazy clouds. That's how long it took to go from a normal evening to an absolute horror. We sat under the stairs for maybe that much time again. 2 minutes pass, possibly 3 at most. It seemed like longer, of course, and everything was shaking. I was just waiting for the walls to tear apart around us, or debris to start smashing through the floor. Then the sound passed, and we came out. The house was still standing around us. So far, so good. We go back out on the front porch and the door won't open. I give it a heave and push it open, and squeeze out. The porch is destroyed. We had a small barn sitting in front of our house, and it had been obliterated. The tornado had picked up the barn, turned it into kindling, and threw it at our house. The posts on the front porch were all destroyed, and it was just covered with broken glass, nails, shattered 2x4s, and pieces of particle board. Looking out over our pasture in front of the house, where we kept a horse and some cows, and there were just masses of trees down everywhere. One strand of pines in the south of our house, and probably about 2 or 3 acres of trees in total were just gone. Our cars were pockmarked with hail damage. One full-size pontoon boat that we used for family trips to the lake on weekends had been picked up from the front yard, rotated 90 degrees, and deposited in the backyard about 50 yards away. Behind our house, a massive poplar tree was down over the driveway, and it had fallen just feet from the house. Yet, other things remained weirdly untouched. One of our barns was destroyed, but the other, standing maybe 30 yards away, wasn't missing a shingle. All in all, we were incredibly lucky. The house sustained major damage. Despite its appearance, though, the roof had to be replaced because the suction from the tornado had made it unstable. In fact, to this day, you can still see cracks in the walls and the corners of the top floor, where the tornado had nearly sucked the roof off the house. But we came out, none of us hurt, and even slept in our own beds that night. So when I see stories like that out of Oklahoma a while ago, I always think back to those few minutes of horror, and how lucky I was that those weren't my last moments, as they were for so many others. This past September, I had taken a road trip down to Myrtle Beach with the family. It was myself, my mother, my sister, her husband and their 2 kids. We had used my car and both my sister and husband's car to transport everything and all of us. We had rented a beach house for a little over a week and had a pretty great time. I was in the middle of a difficult point in my life and struggling with employment and being between jobs and having just started 2 new jobs fresh. I was a little low on funds and worried about making my car payments and the like. So I opted to head home 2 days early with my car so that I could try and get more work hours in. My family expressed being nervous as I planned to leave after dinner and drive through the night to get home. I consoled them that I would be okay, because I'd be up all night and head straight home and only stop for gas and food as needed. I'm an excellent driver, a tad impatient, so I tend to go until I absolutely have to stop and take a break. However, this would be a 12-hour trip, and I knew I would need breaks, so I made a point to stop at every rest stop to at least get out and stretch, so I stayed awake and didn't get too sore. Going through West Virginia, I'm sure you guys know how secluded their rest stops and visitor centers are, especially when you're heading north from the south going through the mountains. I stopped at a visitor center because they advertised having a fast food joint, and I really had to answer nature's call. This was sometime very late at night, between 1 and 3 a.m. Side note that sent shivers down my spine after what happened? I like to drive barefoot. So I pulled in, noticed the building with fast food was closed, and I drove around the lot and parked under a street light in front of the visitor center so that I could use the restroom. Leaning out of my car door, I took my time putting my shoes on and walking inside, having looked around and not seeing anything out of the ordinary. I checked my phone, grabbed my wallet before standing up to walk in, and made sure my car made the noise to signal the doors were locked. Walking towards the center, I saw a man in a white hoodie standing at the edge of the sidewalk, leading into the center. I didn't think much of it until I passed him, and got an off vibe. I glanced over at my shoulder, and he was watching me walk in. For some reason, I glanced to my left as I turned back to face forwards, and noted another man sitting at the benches that were on the other side of tall, thin bushes. Oh, nope, I thought. I instantly went in, peed, and before I got out the bathroom I called my roommate. As dumb as it was, because he was a good 4 to 6 hours away, it just made me feel safer. I gave him a quick rundown of my situation and made him stay on the phone with me. I started to walk out, and couldn't see the man at the front of the sidewalk anymore. I glanced to my now right and saw both men standing next to a bench facing forwards. I saw a couple walking in to, presumably, use the restroom as well. I had an intense impulse to ask them to walk with me, but my paranoia kicked in because I knew something was wrong somewhere in my situation, and I didn't ask, thinking that they might know the men. Walking briskly to my car, I explained to my roommate that the men were by the benches, daring the smallest of peeks over my shoulder again, and I saw the man in the white hoodie walking towards me, and I told my roommate. Walking a few paces forwards, I looked back and saw his pace had quickened. At this point, I told my roommate that he was following me to my car, and I booked it. I thankfully had the key fob, got my key out, and ready to unlock my car, and practically threw myself in, not daring to glance back. I threw my car in reverse and gunned it backwards before going back into drive and sped off, and didn't even bother to put my seatbelt on until I was at the exit of the parking lot, and didn't look back once. I stopped at the next toll road and filed a report, and the workers called for state troopers to head over and check things out. I didn't stop shaking for hours, and refused to get out of my car until I was home. I horrified myself at the thought If those guys had paid attention and made their move quicker, they could have incapacitated me at my car while I was facing the ground and putting my shoes on, and I could have had absolutely no defense. Please, be careful on the road. I have had quite a few crazy stories. I'm not sure what it is, but a lot of crazy stuff has happened to me in the past. But this experience is one that I don't really like to talk about. It's just very unsettling and uncomfortable. But I feel like sharing might do me some good. So let us begin. For starters, if you don't know what Club Penguin is, it's a virtual world where you played as a penguin. You could chat from people all over the world, customize your penguin, change its color, buy its clothes, decorate its house, play games, do missions, and the like. You also even had pets that you could take care of. It was actually a pretty cool game, but definitely not as safe for kids as its advertisements made it out to be. Don't get me wrong, it had chat filters, loads of warnings on the site about not sharing personal info, reporting and blocking options, and all that good safety jazz. And there was, of course, an age limit. Now, all of that being said, I never understand how people develop games like this and think that everything is going to be peachy. Kids aren't stupid. They know how to get around the safety stuff, and more importantly, adults know how to take advantage of it. This is a story about how I was taken advantage of by an adult posing as a child on Club Penguin. Obviously, I was very young when it all happened. I don't remember the exact digits, but I want to say 7 or 8. I had a basic little Club Penguin account with a random name, and I had lots of friends on there because I was a bit of a loner at school, only having about 1 or 2 friends that weren't even in most of my classes. Like most kids, I made up for the lack of socialization online and tried to make friends with anyone I found interesting. Well, one day, I met a black penguin. He had a pretty generic name like Cool Dude with a bunch of numbers after it. He was really interesting though, and he said he was my age and liked a lot of the same things I did. We'd often spend time shopping for our penguins together, or decorating our igloo houses while chatting up a storm about just about anything. TV shows, books, music, school. We talked for about 2 weeks, and eventually, I told him my first name. Stupid, I know. After I told him my name, he asked if I had a phone, or if I had Facebook, and at the time I didn't, so he said that we should just keep talking on Club Penguin. Over time though, I eventually stopped going online as often, and he'd tell me that he'd miss talking to me whenever I'd come back on. There was a time where I didn't go on for almost 2 weeks. I should mention at the time that being so young I didn't write emails or even check my email, so my parents and my older brother kept track of it for me. One day my brother told me that a guy was emailing me, and he asked me who it was. I looked at the emails and recognized the username as the same one the boy had on his Club Penguin account. I told my brother he was a friend of mine that I had met on Club Penguin. He said I didn't need to be giving out my email like that, because I don't know who this person could really be. I tried to tell him that I had never given out my email to anyone, but he didn't believe me at the time, and just told me that it was okay but not to do it again, and he blocked the email. I logged on to Club Penguin the next day, and the boy never mentioned the emails, so neither did I. We just hung out and chatted away, like always. Another week went by, and my brother came into my room to check my computer like he always did. But this time was different. My brother told me to leave the room and for some reason to go and get my mum. Later I found out that the boy was not a boy at all, but a man in his mid-30s to 40s. My parents believed he had hacked my Club Penguin account to get my email, so that he could start sending me photos of himself. Photos that he should not be sending to a young child, if you know what I mean. My inbox was flooded with pictures of him fully exposed, and messages saying that he loved me, and that he wanted to meet me in person. I felt violated when I found out. To this day, it still bothers me when I think about it. I had just turned 21, and obviously wanted to celebrate by going to the most popular dance club in my town with a few girlfriends. I'd never had a fake ID or anything, so this was my first clubbing experience. We get inside and order drinks. I ordered a girly type bottled drink. We drank for a bit, and then hit the dance floor. So I had been taught about safety while out at the club. I knew all the things to watch out for. A tip that a co-worker had once given to me was to put your thumb partially in the neck of your bottled drink if you're not going to be paying close attention to it, as it disables access for anyone who might want to put something in there. So that is exactly what I did the entire night. A few guys had asked us girls to dance, and we obliged. Eventually, the second guy I ended up dancing with gave me a weird vibe. He tried to buy me a drink, saying he would go to the bar and get it for me. I declined. He asked if he could hold my drink for me while we danced, seeing as how I had a wristlet in my other hand, and he just wanted to be helpful. I declined and he got pushy. I got the weird vibe after those couple of different passes, and when the songs changed I left him, saying I needed to find my friends. My friends and I hung out for a while, then went back out onto the dance floor. Lo and behold, who would slide up next to me? So here I am, a 21-year-old with no clubbing experience and no huge dating experience, feeling uncomfortable while this guy dances with me. I don't assert myself. I was intimidated and feeling a little rubbish. I let him dance near me, kind of vaguely dancing but avoided eye contact, keeping an eye on my friends, both of whom were dancing nearby. And that's when he got all touchy-feely. He put one of his hands on my waist, not aggressively, but it made me even more uncomfortable. Took my free hand as the wristlet was hanging on my wrist, and made a few "woohoo, look at us, we're dancing" kind of motions. Then he switched his hand, ran down my other arm, lightly grasped my hand, the one where I was holding my drink, and I feel his finger slide until he's touching my bottle. My stomach turned over, but I kept dancing, not really knowing what to do. And that's how it went, every so often. He would feel around my hand and bottle, my thumb firmly lodged in there, and then let go. After about a minute of this, I felt his forefinger and thumb grasp my bottle thumb as if to confirm, to test, to see if it was indeed in there. At that moment, the song changed, and I saw my friend in my peripheral vision. I made direct eye contact with him, and we shared a moment that really made me feel like he was thinking, "I know you just got what I was trying to do." And I fled in the direction of my friend, and we found my other friend and went to another club. I can't think of another reason why he would want to have his hand near my own hands or my drink. I know what he wanted to do, and so do you. I wonder how many other girls he had tried that with that night. I certainly hope he never succeeded. What a creep. I lived off the base of Pikes Peak in Colorado Springs, and during the spring and summer I spent a lot of time in the mountains. By far the scariest thing that has ever happened to me in those mountains was an hour-long lightning storm that ended up putting me and two of my buddies in quite a bit of danger. 5 of us came up together in a Jeep Wrangler and a Hummer. And while on our way, we got a phone call from someone saying they would meet us. Great. Directions to the spot are given, as well as directions to a go-to spot that was very easy to find off a main road before it got woody, in case they could not find our camping spot. After a certain amount of time would pass, one of us would leave for the go-to spot and guide the third car back. This is sometimes how we go about things to plan around loss of cell service. Well, enough time passed for two of us to hop into the Hummer and go find our other friend. This left three of us to hang out, which was no problem until the storm hit. If you've never been on the Front Range of Colorado during hail season, then you won't understand how very devastating and quick a storm can form, and oddly enough break up and then calm. Seemingly out of nowhere, a light drizzle, which quickly turned to heavy rain, and then marble-sized hail. Just as quickly as the storm hit us, we realized our biggest problem. The Jeep only had 2 seats, and it's filled up with camping supplies, a very nice telescope, and other odds and ends. There was no room for 3 people. Period. It was unspoken that we should not leave someone outside in the hail, nor would just one of us go into the Jeep. We were in this. Getting obliterated by rain and annoyed by some decent hail, the electricity started flying. We were in a canyon, so thunder was rolling and echoing, and sounding as if Zeus had just found out I just gave Calliope a poke and never returned her call. The noise was terrifying. We found a blue tarp in the back of the Jeep, and were just able to tie it to a few trees to at least shelter us from the rain. But it was one particular bolt of lightning that changed my respect for the power of the Rockies. About 50 feet from where we were hurdled was a fence that outlined the property of a very large ranch. You couldn't see the ranch by any means, but the fence was clear as day, as well as a large pillar that stuck from the ground with a sign that said, "Warning, trespassers may be shot," or something similar bolted to it. While we were waiting for the storm to pass, and all the while among dozens of very loud and bright clashes of thunder and lightning, a massive bolt bends around the mountain, of which's base we were against, and strikes onto this post, absolutely frying it. It was as if the bolt clung to the post for a solid 2 to 3 seconds. Needless to say, we were horrified, because this was considerably less than 100 feet away, and this bolt was huge. The most disturbing part of it was for about 10 seconds after the bolt had gone away, that trespassing sign was glowing molten red, and vibrated so loudly that we could hear it over the rest of the storm. Our friends in the Hummer returned perhaps 45 minutes after this, and by then, the sky was clear, and it wasn't 75 degrees again. When I was younger, I would spend the night at my cousin's house, because they had a major collection of video games. This was the era of the first PlayStation. I always enjoyed playing Resident Evil. Zombies were my favorite of all time. You would catch me playing Resident Evil 2. I loved that game. My grandpa was a quiet guy who would clean a lot and run his year-round yard sales. Occasionally he would stand behind me, light his cigarette, and watch me play Resident Evil 2. I would be shooting zombies and he would yell, "Shoot him in the head!" I would explain that I can't specifically aim for the head, but it wouldn't register in his head. This went on for years. In 2009, he passed away. So not long ago, Resident Evil 2 was remade. I went to GameStop to buy it, brought it home and began playing. As you now know, the game is much more advanced. You can shoot anywhere now. The head, arms, legs. It was 2 in the morning, and I decided to throw down some Resident Evil 2. I hadn't had so much fun in a long time. I paused the game, lit up a cigarette while playing with one hand, and I was shooting all over the place. Then I got sad for some reason. It just came over me, and all of a sudden, loud and clear, did I hear the words, "Shoot him in the head." I looked around. There was no one. My brother was sleeping, and my uncle was at his girlfriend's house. It sounded like my grandpa, but of course I thought I was hearing things. So, I did it. I kept shooting the zombies in the head. Then the dread I was feeling lifted. I felt like my grandpa was there. I knew what I heard. It was uplifting and scary at the same time. I was 18 years old, and on my way home to California on summer break, after my sophomore year of college. I had a 9-hour car ride ahead of me, and stocked up on energy drinks, soda, and snacks for the ride home. I left school late after dinner with friends, and planned on driving into the night. I'm making good time, and I'm around 3 or 4 hours from home, which was Yuba City at the time. I'm an hour outside Reno, and on a lonely stretch of road when it happened. I suddenly get the urge to pee. Those energy drinks I chugged coming back to haunt me, and I kick myself in the ass for not stopping when I had gassed up 45 minutes before. I saw a sign that advertised a rest stop coming up, and so I drove the few miles to the sign, then pulled in. Parked in the parking lot was a ratchet-looking sedan, and on the other side of the lot, a Sprinter-type van. I quickly got out and hurriedly jogged to the restroom before I peed myself. I was flushing when I heard someone enter, and I froze. I'm in decent physical shape, and I work out quite often, but for a guy, I'm on the smaller side at only 5'7" and 160 pounds. So I'm bracing myself for some Michael Myers type stuff, when I open the door and see an average Joe looking guy. He looks up, gives me a friendly smile, and then steps over to the urinal. I washed my hands and was getting ready to leave when he starts talking. His voice was gravelly and low, so I couldn't hear him the first time. "You like dogs, man?" he asked me as he washed his hands. He was wearing those coveralls that mechanics wear, and he had grease stains on it. My creepometer started beeping. I shot him a friendly smile and said, "Yeah man, dogs are cool," as I left. Well, that was the wrong thing to say, because he comes out the door almost at my heel. "I got a new puppy. Wanna see him? He's real cute." Now I'm freaking out. Keys are in one hand and my cell phone in the other. I call back in a shaky voice, "Nah, thanks. Gotta get going." I'm getting to my car when he grabs the door, trying to open it wider. This dude was strong, and he's a good few inches smaller than me. I start my car and put my phone to my ear, and what he said next caused me to almost crap my pants. "Tell him the cops are here. You'll already be finished." With that, I kicked at his stomach, and thank goodness it connected. He let go of the door and fell on his ass. I then locked the doors and screeched the hell out of that rest stop. I saw him scramble for his car, but I didn't stay around enough to watch, and I took off like a bat out of hell. I was a nervous wreck for the next 3 hours, thinking he was going to follow me home and finish me off. When I got home, I told my dad, who had stayed up to wait for me, about what happened, and he told me to not call the authorities. I made sure to take an entirely different route when I went back to school in the fall, and because of that, I've never stopped at another rest stop ever again. So dude, wherever you are, I don't want to see your puppy. My dad passed away when I was 16, from complications due to a motorcycle accident 3 years prior. We had moved out of the house he passed in and into a new one rather quickly. The first thing we set up was his little memorial spot. He was cremated and kept with us because his last words were, "I want to be with my family." This little shrine, as we like to call it, was at the top of the stairs outside my bedroom. One night, I had both my closet and bedroom door open and started seeing something black dart in and out of view in my closet, like it was peeking its head out at me. I got a bad feeling about it, but tried to ignore it, but it persisted. I called my boyfriend at the time and tried to distract myself with conversation, but it kept on going. My boyfriend was never a believer in ghosts, so when I told him about what was happening, it was no surprise that he dismissed it. I was sure I could prove him wrong, so I started taking pictures on my iPad and scouring them over trying to find a black mass in the closet. I didn't find anything of note, so I gave up and put the iPad down. At some point in my phone conversation, I lay the iPad while it was still on picture mode, causing it to zoom into the corner of the room above the bedroom door. Without even trying to see anything, I could clearly see my dad's head shape and broad shoulders. It looked like he was wearing sunglasses too. I like to think he was checking in on me, or maybe keeping whatever it was in the closet close at bay. Everyone I showed the picture to could see him too. I eventually put a picture of him in sunglasses next to the iPad pic, and put a giant red circle around Ghostad. Now, I only have that version of the picture instead of the original. But anyway, I can't remember what generation my iPad was. This was 2011. Beyond the doorway in the stand, my dad's urn sat, along with pictures and candles. Maybe that's why he showed up. I'm not sure. The calm before the storm is real. One time that will stick with me is when I was fishing with my dad. It was a pretty rubbish day, and after a while we could see some pretty mean-looking storm clouds off in the distance. All of a sudden everything got quiet. No more birds, no more wind. It was extreme quiet. The lake surface was smooth, and we stopped drifting. We continued to fish for a few minutes when my dad froze and said, "Hey, do you hear that?" I stopped moving and listened. I did hear something, a faint rustling sound that was slowly growing in volume. My dad, as he is quite the outdoorsman, and has most likely experienced this before, pointed to the far shore and said, "It's the wind." I looked in the direction he pointed, and I could see the wind. Or more, I could see the effects. A line of disturbed water was moving towards us from the shore, and everything behind it was being whipped around. Trees would get hit by the line and all of a sudden look as if they were in a storm. The rustling grew in intensity as the line approached us. Still utterly calm where we were, my dad and I watched. This line of chaos raced towards us, and when it hit, it was night and day. A wall of air slammed into us, causing us to physically recoil, and we were instantly in a storm. At least no rain was present yet. The wind howling around our ears made the low rustling sound immediately transform into a harsh, continuous blast. Communication went from quiet voices to yelling towards each other. My dad yelled to me that we were leaving before it got any worse, and so we hightailed it off to the lake as it began to turn into angry seas. Fun times. So to put this into context, I had just finished my competitive exams to enter an engineering school, meaning that I just came out of high school preparatory classes, aka 2 years of hell in the French system. I needed to get out before getting my final results, so as the naive, gullible, and honestly sort of dumb 18-year-old I was, I decided I wanted to go to Berlin and stay in a hostel for a week by myself. My parents allowed me to go, although I can be dumb, I'm trustworthy, and usually well aware of risks. So I went. When I got there, I sat outside next to my hostel, because the room wouldn't be available for 3 more hours. A 30-something-year-old dude came up and sat next to me. I asked for a cigarette, and that started a conversation. How great. He seemed pretty nice, liked filmmaking, and we shared the same political views, and the discussion is lively and entertaining. That's a nice dude right there. Plus, he offered to get us a beer at the nearest supermarket, so I'm pretty cool with the first person I met. Sure, right. He suggests we go out and get a drink later with the Airbnb guest he has over, but first to go to his place for a bit. This is where I get really stupid. I was a little iffy, but he seemed nice enough, and for some reason I didn't even give it a second thought. He could be lying about the other person being there, so I agreed, and he came to my hostel to pick me up. He literally lived 100 meters away. How convenient. When I met him, although he spoke perfect English earlier, he was now not really making any sense, probably mixing German and English. He had no real point in his sentences, and he took forever to reply to whatever I was saying. First red flag, you say? But I tried reassuring myself, thinking that perhaps he'd just had a bit too much to drink. When we get up to his apartment, I find an Airbnb guest, a 40-something-year-old American who kind of looked petrified. I immediately understood why, considering the apartment was an absolute dump. We went to sit in the kitchen, but I refused to drink anything, finally gaining some common sense, and asked the guy several times why he was being so weird, and he told me that he had taken some coke. Now I go into full-blown panic mode. I had never taken anything besides the occasional joint, so to me, that was 8 out of 10 on the messed up scale. I realized he had me trapped against the wall and was blocking the only exit. At this point, I'm already envisioning many ways to leave this place if things get messy. And at some point the guy got up to do whatever, and the Airbnb guy told me the rooms look nothing like they did on the website, and he hadn't signed up for this. We were whispering to each other that we needed to get the hell out of there, and that he needed to find a hotel to stay in, like we were in a movie or something. When the guy came back, I told him I was pretty uncomfortable staying there, and for approximately 10 minutes he refused we leave, telling me that I could not, until I just got up, went to the front door, and he held me back for another 5 minutes, because I was nice and didn't want to storm off and trigger anything. The dude finally let me go, and I ran for it. I didn't go out for 2 days, not even to get anything to eat. I just watched TV shows and stayed in bed. So, creepy Berlin guy, you definitely killed the naive part of me, so thank you for that. But, please, let's never meet again. About a year ago, my cousin and I, who were both 19 at the time, decided to go sailing on a pretty windy day, with about 7 Beaufort and a 1.5 to 2 meter high wave on the North Sea on the Dutch coast. Now, the boat we sailed on was our own, a Dart 18 catamaran, and was over 30 years old. With that age, things break quite easily and often, so we went through the first row of waves, no problems at all, and went about 10 kilometers off the coast. The wind was coming from the east, meaning that we had to zigzag back to the coast, as no boat can sail into the wind. So about a quarter of the way back, Suddenly both of our rudders broke, and we had nothing to communicate with. This meant that we had to steer using our sail to get back. That, on its own, is not a very big problem. What is, though, is that with a catamaran it's very difficult to turn when facing the wind. It also means that big waves for an only 18-foot sailboat, plus no rudders, plus a hard wind blowing us away from the coast, meant that we were very much sitting there in the sea, thinking that we had no way of getting back. Luckily, we had previous experience with steering with sails only, as we learnt to do that for fun, and we remembered that we could use the high waves to gain extra speed when going down from the wave. So we used that in order to zigzag back. We capsized around 5 times, which was extremely exhausting, especially with those fairly strong winds. It took until about 2 AM to get to the coast, and we landed about 10 kilometers from the club from where the boat had its place. In the past couple of years, I have been doing a lot of spiritual energy practices and have discovered a variety of things humans are actually capable of doing. Some of my discoveries were accidental, and some were through intentional experimentation. I play a popular game called Team Fortress 2. In this game there is a character called the Spy, who is a stealth character that hides within your team and ends you with a single knife to the back. The Spy is a very irritating character, and every time that he gets me, I become annoyed and have assigned that annoyed feeling to him. There's sometimes, however, on several occasions, where I would randomly get this feeling out of nowhere. It's a sort of subtle anxiety that just creeps up on me, and for no reason. The strange feeling just starts off weak until it gets stronger and stronger, until I actually get hit by an enemy spy. Now, assuming that I could actually sense a player in a video game was too far-fetched even for me. But lately, that feeling has helped me out on more than one occasion. Now, the feeling doesn't happen all the time, but when it does, I either acknowledge it and turn around to fire spy, or ignore it and get finished off. It's almost like I could sense the intentions of the person playing, as the spy is plotting and planning to get me. When I get this strong feeling and accept it, I turn around to find a spy who's failed to get me. Focusing on the feeling makes me more receptive to it in the future, and the more I ignore it, the less often it happens. Sometimes I get the feeling multiple times, and I'd find the spy behind me each of those times. I really have no way to explain this, but I continue to focus on this feeling as it has been helpful to me on more than just one occasion. Just a bit of background before I try and tell this story. I live in one of the bad parts of a city in Ontario, Canada, with my parents. I woke up at 10 AM. I had a busy night of cleaning, and I did the usual routine of turning on my laptop, checking my emails and Facebook, when I got a knock on the door. Now we are looking for a new house because our landlord wanted us immediately out, and she is one of those unprofessional ones. When I looked out the window, there was this woman, who looks like she could be related to the landlord. I woke up my dad, Bob, and he answered the door. This woman was actually a homeless person, but something about her seemed a bit off. She had her pants down, and she was wearing leotards, and she smelled awful, like a dead animal was left in a garbage full of expired food for a month. She had teardrop tattoos below her eyes, and now for those of you who don't know, that means that she has committed an unspeakable act against another person, effectively ending that person. She pulled her pants up and started rambling about some mumbo-jumbo, including that meth is medicine. One of the mumbo-jumbos stuck to me. She said that she was a guardian angel, and she kept going on about how she's just a spirit trapped in a body. She also said that she was dead thrice. She asked for a place to stay, but we said no. Good choice of words in my opinion, because she was giving me major red flags. Like she was giving me that vibe that she was unpredictable. We gave her a coffee and cigarettes and warmth, but she still gave me red flags. We finally asked her to nicely leave, and she took 45 minutes getting ready. She kept asking for a ride or money for a taxi, but we couldn't do that. I know that seems insensitive, but we gotta do what we gotta do. She finally left, but she did not wear her boots. She left them on our neighbor's lawn, leaving us to enjoy the rest of our day. Many years ago, when I was a little one, my mum was on the computer doing whatever adults do on those magic boxes that house 3D pinball and FreeCell. I, being the greedy little gorb I was, decided I wanted a crunchy from the kitchen. And so I walked downstairs, and as I walked into the dining room, I heard a man's voice say, "Hey, Jay, it's okay." I thought maybe it was just my mum calling me from upstairs, and so I got my crunchy, ran upstairs and asked, "What is it, mummy?" To which she said, "I didn't call you." For a while after, I used to swear I could see the figure of a man standing in my bedroom at night, and would tell my mum about the man in my room who came out of the wardrobe. She always just brushed it off, and went with saying, "Night-night," to the man in the wardrobe before I slept. Well, for years there was nothing, and as I grew older it just developed into me realizing how much of a silly kid I was, making this nonsense up. Until about 2 years ago, I woke up earlier than normal. I was daydreaming someone had been calling my name. After waking up and realizing no one was in my room or even calling my name, I was ready to brush it off and go back to sleep, until a man's voice said, "Jay, I miss you." Now call me insane, but this freaked me out, and I felt like telling people would just make me look like a waste of oxygen. But about a year ago, I stumbled upon a bunch of old cassettes, which she had recorded over the years, and played one in the radio to see what it was. Eventually a tape came up, and there was the voice. It was engraved in my brain. I couldn't forget it. My granny told me that was my dad talking. My dad died nearly 20 years ago, and I never got to know him and have no memories of him as I was far too young. He loved me and never had me out of his arms. With myself being quite a skeptical person, it was hard to grasp this, as it is against a lot of things I believe to be the case. However, from what it seems, my dad has always been there. Never seen, but definitely heard. My dad and I had been hiking out in Colorado, and on this day we were doing the Shavano-Tabiguache Pear, which to anyone accustomed to climbing 14ers know isn't very difficult, just a fun day hike. As the sun came up, we noticed it was completely cloud covered, but figured they'd all burn off in a few hours. As the day goes on, we summit both peaks and are coming back to Shavano completely engulfed in the sheet of clouds. Visibility was a good 10 feet max. Now I say the difficulty isn't bad, but as we're making our way down Shavano, back to the tree line, we ended up coming down the opposite side of the mountain. Now we make it down about 2,000 feet before we notice something's wrong. Just then, the clouds decide it was time to start pouring on us, with the fog only getting worse. As we come down further, the incline starts getting relatively steep, and we decide the best move is to turn around and go back up the saddle and cross back into the valley we came up on, which is a very stupid decision. We make it about 1,000 feet back up, and we still can't see the top anywhere in sight, and the several ton boulders we've been climbing up are hella slick and are starting to shift with all the rain. Still pouring, I finally decide it's time to try and call search and rescue. After spending 30 minutes trying to get a signal, we manage to get a hold of them, and they say that all that we can do is go all the way down to the valley and hike through the woods for several miles until we run into the Colorado Trail. They had no way of reaching us. At this point I tell my dad, at least there's no lightning. And just like that, a few 100 feet away strikes the first bolt, and from then on, we're in a full-on thunderstorm, 1,500 feet above the tree line on the side of the mountain. So we freak the hell out and start running down the mountain, not caring about slipping or falling. We manage to make it down to Shivano Lake without making any more than a few scrapes and bruises, and we think, hell yeah, we did it. It was just a quick walk in the woods back to camp. And I'm not going to go much more into detail, but the woods we ended up walking in were another 5 hours in the pouring rain / near freezing. I'll never forget how good the shower felt that night. I was 16 and living with my dad. I was getting ready to go to sleep, and suddenly it was like someone sat on the foot of my bed. I felt the weight settle down and the mattress / box spring creak a little. I was laying on my side facing away at the time, so I sort of half sat up and half turned towards the foot of the bed. I could just barely make out the outline of a hunched over shadow figure sitting there. The moonlight coming through the blinds gave it a weird shimmery effect, almost like The Predator, but with shadows, if that makes sense. I just kind of froze and all the hairs on my body stood on end. Not wanting to disturb whatever it was, I slowly laid back down while trying to keep my eyes on it. It was facing away from me, and it didn't seem to be aware of me, or perhaps just didn't care. After a little while of staring at it, I slowly pulled my covers up over my face and started to silently cry a little bit, because it was just too much. I was more terrified than I had ever been in my life, and my adrenaline was racing. I don't know how long it was, but eventually I felt the weight ease off the bed. I sat there listening to any signs of what was happening, too afraid to peek out of the covers. I'd seen horror movies, and it sounded like a really bad idea at the time. A moment later, a bunch of hangers in my closet jingled, and I ripped off the covers to look, but whatever it was had gone. On the floor of my closet lay some clothes that had previously been hung up. I had just gotten home from Iraq, and I was visiting family up in the country at my grandparents' house. On my way back to my mum's house after dinner, the check engine light flipped on, and I pulled over as soon as I could to check the fluids and such. Breaking down out here is bad, simply due to the narrow roads and the miles you have to go to get anywhere. My mother was supposed to be leaving not long after me, so I sent her a text because calling was futile and decided to look around a bit until she showed up. I had pulled over fairly close to this property alongside the river, but there was a crude wall in the front yard blocking the view from the road. It looked abandoned, so I let myself in. There was a lot of pot growing inside the house. Everything had been gutted, and it was just plants and those heating lamps. I noped out of there faster than I ever have in my life and waited for my mum to put oil in the car. And I was just about to be on my way when this rusty red pickup truck drives by. The driver slows and looks at us, then turns around quickly and pulls up behind us. He was an older guy, and he looked like he hadn't showered in days, wearing blue overalls and no shirt. He jumps out, ran to my mum's car and starts knocking on the window. I'm thinking that this is the end. We told him about the car and about me just getting home from deployment. He just stared at us for what felt like forever and told us that next time we break down, to do it somewhere else. He stood by his truck until we were out of sight. That was terrifying. Back when Pokemon Go first came out, I discovered a local park that was a good spot to catch Pokemon. It was divided into 3 parts. One that was more rustic, with wooden benches, and would be best described as a trail. A street was after that, and since the trail couldn't go into the street, a bridge was built that ran under the road. After the road was a park, with the trail running behind it, complete with a playground. The third part wasn't as wooded as the first, but wasn't as open as the second, as it was rather narrow and had newer benches and a smoother walkway. A river in a deep ditch ran alongside the whole trail, all the way to the third area, which I rarely went to. I was in 8th grade at the time. I'm going into 11th next year, and I was very short for my age, so I was often mistaken for being younger. It was late and getting very dark out. I had my phone flashlight out so that I could see where I was walking, but due to the clouds it was still very dark. My mum was watching me in the car, fortunately, and even though it was too dark for her to see me, she could see the flashlight. I was walking under the bridge from the first area to the second, when I heard someone said, "Hey kid, come here." I didn't know what to do, so I stopped dead in my tracks. He was over by the river on the other side of the park with the woods behind it. A pretty obscured spot. I might have gone over there if he hadn't have said the classic line, "If you come over here, I'll give you a candy." That was it for me, and I started to run away as fast as I could. My mum said later that my light was bouncing, so she knew something was up. I almost ran in a semicircle back to where I came from, then towards the road and to my car. I only caught a glimpse of the guy, but he was right behind me when I started running. He seemed very tall, wearing dark clothes, and as I ran he yelled, "Kid, over here," over and over. I kept running and got to the car and just told my mum to drive. It might not be the creepiest thing that's ever happened, but it was definitely enough for me. Who knows what would have happened if he'd have caught up to me. When I slept in my old room, I would often feel breathing in my face, as if someone was kneeling next to my bed and breathing right at me. It never bothered me, because it felt like someone was watching over me. When I was home alone, I could sometimes hear the door handle of my father's room go up. It makes a very distinct sound that can't be replicated because it's an old and creaky door handle. I've switched rooms over the years, and now sometimes I hear the sound of cloth scraping over the floor, as if someone were walking round with a heavy robe or something. But I could never pinpoint the exact location of the sound's origin. One time I was trying to sleep when I suddenly heard a noise from my closet. I carefully open it and see my empty coat hangers flop around a bit as if someone had just gone through them. Nothing bad ever happened, but sometimes I got the feeling that I wasn't alone in that house. The floor in the hallway was always creaking as if someone had just stepped on it, and there'd be times where I'd faintly hear someone walking up the stairs. It was certainly unnerving. When I was living in San Francisco, I sailed in a beer can league every Wednesday. Generally, the conditions are not so bad, and if it is, we can reduce the sail area, which is called reefing. Anyway, one evening we were faced with winds of around 25 knots, gusting up to 30. Honestly, this should have probably cancelled the race. But it was near the end of the season and people were starting to get pretty competitive. Fast forward to the race. We have rounded the furthest buoy and are heading backwards towards the finish line, when we see that another of the boats has gotten their shroud hung up on a buoy. Another boat was already rendering assistance, so we go and finish the race without incident. As we are motoring around the harbour, having our last post-cruise beer, the Coast Guard shows up with a helicopter and powerboat, sirens blazing. The boat launches and they go out to rescue the stranded racers. As people start to trickle into the clubhouse, we learned what happened. Apparently the skipper was cutting it close to the buoy like we did, right when a gust hit him. The shrouds were caught on the buoy, which ended up pulling the mast down, killing one of his crew and breaking the neck of another. The skipper walked away unscathed. There were only a few boats in our fleet, and we were all pretty close. I knew every person in the league by name. This story was about my first time having mushrooms. I was sitting in a camp chair around a campfire with some other friends. We see this guy maybe 20 yards or so away, bent over looking closely at things and bumping around the tents. He had several flashing/glowing necklaces and braces, and was definitely looking the part of having ingested something dubious, but was maybe in his late 40s or early 50s. He makes his way over to our circle when we ask what he's doing poking around the tents. Maybe he's lost. Certainly wasn't right-minded at the time. He sits on the ground right next to me in my chair and starts going on about how messed up he is, and we just don't understand. Everyone is silently watching and listening to him ramble on. When he turns and looks directly at me, maintains eye contact when he says, "We don't understand," and he removes his eye. His eyeball. He takes that out. That was it for me. I got up and sped walked back to my tent, zipped it out and noped right out of there, wondering just how that happened, and was sure it would give me nightmare for weeks to come. A few minutes later, one of my friends opens the tent and comes in, and tells me that after everyone about crapped themselves, they found out he had an artificial eye. I'm assuming after someone probably tried to help after what they thought was an emergency of a guy tearing his own eye. Anyway, not a big thing. But to witness something like that after being on hallucinogenics for the first time was incredibly intense. Me and my sister used to share a room. I was around 10 and had to sleep by the closet, and I was always scared of it because our closet door broke off and it was just pitch black in there. I woke up in a cold sweat and started feeling like something was watching me. So I was facing my sister and I flipped over to face the closet. I look over and my mum's silhouette is standing there, looking at her phone with her hand on her hip. I get confused and I say, "Mum?" And then this thing snaps its head over to me. And, I kid you not, it had the most demonic looking glowing red eyes. I got so terrified I just whipped my blanket over my head and didn't move, and eventually fell back asleep. But it was terrifying. It definitely wasn't something from this earth, and I even asked my mum if she was in the room that night, and she said no. I'm not sure if it was my imagination or not, but it was certainly freaky. I went cruising around in Hurricane Sandy. I enjoy going out in bad weather for some reason, as it's a cheap thrill. But I saw the number of trees down and leaves everywhere. It quickly went from "this is cool" to "holy crap, it's a really dumb decision and I could die." I drove 20 minutes to find my friend's house at 3 or 4 a.m, only to turn around when her mother wouldn't let her out the house. I drove around in the next hurricane too. My friend's girlfriend and I went to get cigarettes, and while I was creeping down a road with my head out the window looking at a fallen tree, a downed power line smacked right off the windshield in front of my face. I saw it out the corner of my eye at the last second, as this dark shape rushing at my face, and I let out a little scream that I claimed was fully masculine and she claims was the scream of a little girl. I also tried walking to a gas station for fun in the middle of a 36-inch blizzard in 2013. I made it about 60 yards before I imagined getting stuck and killed by a plow and turned around. Once when I was 9 and home alone, I had an experience I could truly not explain. My school got out a few hours earlier than my parents worked, so I'd often be home alone. While my next door neighbor would babysit my baby brother, I would be in the living room playing Donkey Kong 64 on my Nintendo, when suddenly it turned off. I didn't really think anything of it, so I booted it back up and began playing again. Another few minutes go by and it shuts itself off. At this point, I started to feel like I was being watched, and had the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I tried to turn it back on for a third time and play for a few more minutes, when I hear something from right over my shoulder. The noise is hard to describe, but it sounded like a lion roaring. As soon as I heard it, I ran out the house, not even stopping to put my shoes on. I ran to my neighbor's house and waited there until my parents got home from work. I could never figure out what happened. My mum told me it was probably the washing machine, but the washer was downstairs in the basement, and who was home doing laundry? No one. That's who. Looking back, I remember feeling watched a few times in that house, but nothing ever happened to me again while there. I should also add that I've had the same Nintendo 64 since, and I've never had another issue with it, of it turning itself off by itself in 20 years. I used to work in a trailer park for my parents. Quite often, people would start using methamphetamine, begin to fall behind on rent, and get evicted. Whenever we evicted someone, their trailer was usually too torn to do anything useful with it. Essentially, to prevent having just a trailer in the middle of the park that we couldn't use, we'd buy it from them and just tear it down. Anyway, the scary and creepy part is here. Many of these occupants had children. More than half of all these children's rooms I found had locks on the doors from the outside. Inside the children's room, it was quite evident that the kids would sometimes be locked inside for days at a time, due to the bathroom corners that would sometimes appear. The doors on the insides of the rooms typically had scratch marks along the edges of the door and the frame. Getting rid of all the stuff inside before beginning demolition always frightened me. I was always afraid that I'd end up finding some child in a terrible condition amongst the filth. It never happened, but the odds of it potentially happening were, in my opinion, quite high. This happened to my dad about 10 years ago. He was out gardening and a storm picked up incredibly quickly. He looked up when he heard a sharp noise and a crack. The wind was picking up and felling trees in the forest behind our house. The wind, though, thanks to his fence, which was rather tall, was only skipping over the top of him, and he wasn't really affected yet. So, ignoring it, he tried to be as productive as possible, as he was tending to his garden. Without really realizing it, the wind picked up, and before he knew it, he was in a full-blown storm. He knew at this point he had to go back in, and our garden is very long, so it would be about a 2-minute walk before he'd reach the door. He got up and started to make his way back, when he heard a crack. He turned around to look behind, and a tree was falling directly to him. Fortunately for him, he was only hit by the very top. It did knock him over, and he got a gnarly cut on his head. But had he not noticed sooner, or been just a few steps back, It's likely that he would have been hit by a far heavier part, and that could have been the end of my dad. We're very grateful it wasn't the case. Moral of the story, kids, don't stay out during a storm. I was streaming with friends last night, StarCraft 2, and all of a sudden I heard a little girl's voice. It was around midnight, so most people are asleep, and there's no one in my room with me. One of my friends had his brother in the room, who was 15 but had a relatively deep voice for his age. But I was the only one who heard the sound, and it sounded like it came from my mic or computer. So when I started joking around about it being a ghost or something, my friend went back to the stream and had a listen, because he didn't believe me. Then he found multiple times that it seems like a little boy or girl is talking. At one time, they clearly said, "Can you hear me?" There's also weird moaning sounds, a muffled attempt at talking, them saying, "Hey, everybody." I didn't hear any instances, except the one where I freak out. The majority of the other stuff happened when I left the computer to grab a midnight snack. It was incredibly disconcerting. Years ago, when I was hanging out at a friend's house in the living room playing games or something, I noticed a man kept coming out of a room and staring at us. When I looked at him, he would go back into the room. I figured it was his uncle, but after about an hour of back and forth between him watching us, me looking at him and him going back into the room, I got pretty annoyed, and I ended up asking my friend what his uncle was doing, and he let us know that he's been in a run and isn't home yet. Hearing that, I asked him who the man was who had been watching us the entire time from that room in the hallway. He said there was no room and no other men that live in the house besides him. I pointed to the room and he said it was a closet. I checked to make sure, and after that, everyone was freaked out. His family ended up getting monks to cleanse the home because of it.